Okay, it is 9:34. Let's go ahead and get started with our Law and Licensing Committee meeting for today. I am Chair Hymas, and we have in person with us Member Lear, Member Hart, and Member Carey, and joining virtually with us is Member Wood. So we're happy to have all five of us here. We don't have anybody who have signed up for public comment, so we will jump to agenda item 3.2. This is a Tooele County School District waiver request. And we have, for committee members, we have Angie online. We appreciate her taking the time to do this. We understand that she is in a interesting spot at the moment. So we're appreciative of her time. And we also is AEG Beal. Yes, she is online as well. So Ashley, do you want to give us some background on this and we'll open it up to any questions or comments?
Sure thing, Chair. So this is a waiver request coming out of Tooele School District. It's a waiver for Rule 419, which is the 180-day requirement. The request has been granted previously for 5 schools throughout the Tooele County School District, and this request is coming at a time to try to put those 5 schools together on the same request, so that Tooele County is no longer doing them basically every other year. The previously Dugway School, Vernon Elementary School, and Ibapaw were on one schedule, and Wendover High and Anna Smith Elementary were on another. So this request is putting all 5 of those schools together and requesting a 4-day school week to continue for all of those schools. And that request has been granted previously, and it should be in backups that all proper documentation that was requested and data has been submitted to the committee for consideration.
There we go. Okay. Back on. Can you hear me online?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so committee members, any questions that you have about this waiver request? While you're thinking of that, I reached out and perhaps Angie, if you can, I read your email. We've put your comments in backup as well. One of the questions I had was why Anna Smith and Wendover, when they are so close to West Wendover, which is a bigger city. And I asked the question, is West Wendover in Nevada, are they on a 4-day work week or school week? And is there going to be conflict there? So do you want to speak to that for us, Angie?
Sure. And I appreciate that question. So they are also on a 4-day week. And part of the thing for similar reasons. So one of the things is, it's really helpful for families, the continuing on the 4-day week, where in Wendover, one of the things is, there is a clinic, there is a Smith's grocery store, but one of the things is if you go to the clinic, a lot of times they will, there was a case like last week, I knew of a student where the principal was telling me that he needed stitches. And so it involved one of her teachers and a student, and so they went to the clinic, but then they referred them into Tooele. So either way you go, and that's like 100 miles away, and so they'll use Fridays to go to the dentist or the doctor or a clothing store or to Walmart. And same thing with West Wendover. If you go the other direction, Elko's kind of the same distance away and with the same amenities. So there's really not those amenities. And then with the size of the schools, they are with the 4-day week, they do their extracurriculars on Friday and Saturday. So another thing is that they will, that's when a lot of families, you know, they will take their younger students. And so then they're not missing Friday, you know, as previously when it wasn't 4-day week. Then Friday, they're taking the students and then they can all go, because sometimes that's a long ways to travel when they're playing other schools, but now they can do that. So that's a couple of the main reasons.
Thank you.
With that-
Yeah, thank you, Angie. Vice Chair
You
Carey
bet.
has a question, and then it looks like Member Lear after that.
Okay,
Hi, good morning.
good morning.
I didn't see this in the packet and I may have missed it, but were any surveys of the parents done asking about their feedback and their response as to this proposed change? And if so, is that data available for us to review?
Yes, so in the original packet, I sent a packet in with the waiver, and on that packet, there were, I'm just pulling that up, it's off the top of my head. I know that 92% of the parents felt it was beneficial for their students and family, and 84%, I believe, were overwhelmingly in support of it. But here's the parent results. So there were just a few questions. The 4-day week is beneficial for my child. 92% strongly agreed. The 4-day week is beneficial for our family. That had 71% strongly agreeing. Then rating on if they supported continuing the 4-day school week, that was 73% extremely supportive, and then another 10 mostly supportive. So 83% mostly supportive. And that's the same with the staff, pretty much still those
Thank you.
same
Yeah, and-
percentages.
Thank you, and I apologize. Chair Hymas
problem.
had the survey and provided that to me, and I had a chance to look at the results. Thank you. How was that survey conducted? How was it administered with them coming to you, or did you reach out to them? What was the protocol for the execution of the survey, and how many total results came in?
So we have Qualtrics, so I sent it out through email to them through our Qualtrics, and the principals sent it out on their platforms, but through our district Skyward emails through Qualtrics for the parents to do it.
And what was the response rate? What was the ratio?
So let me get back. We had quite a bit. I want to say over 200 responses. And with our staff, we had the majority of our staff, like 90% of them participate. And of all the parents, I'm sorry, I don't have that right in front of me, but I can get that for you. I did not pack that folder with me and I should have that. I apologize.
No. I'm just, what I'd really be looking for, if it's possible to request, would be the total number of parents who received the invitation to vote and what percentage of those parents actually voted.
did.
That's really what I'm looking for. Because the 200,
Okay.
it doesn't, it sounds like a big, and it very well could be, I just don't know. So, but knowing how many emails were sent and then how many people responded, that would be more indicative of the engagement rate.
Actually, I do have that. So that is in the original packet. So when I looked that up. There were, and it is broken up by question and results. So it has parents at 133 out of 204, and it has the percentages right at the top. So those are the responses of that, but I could get you total number of parents, but we had in the overall survey, 65% of parents responded and 34% of staff members responded. So
That's
not
perfect. Thank
exactly
you.
what you're asking, but
That's those are the numbers I'm looking for, so thank you.
okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. One other thing, if I might add, that I just thought of as far as the other thing with Fridays in Wendover, and I know same with like I didn't mention it and I did include it in there, but our IBAPA students, they also travel to Wendover too. And when they are gone, like on Fridays to athletics, it's also hard to find, like if teachers who have secondary students want to go, it's hard to find the subs out there. We've done a lot of things for incentives for subs. And sorry, I have my phone turned the wrong way. As I was looking, goodness, you guys are probably seeing my luggage. I apologize. The other thing is a sub issue. We've tried to stay competitive with the West End Wendover side and things, and we have some regular subs, but it also helps us with that coverage with subs too.
Thank you, Angie. Member Lear?
My questions are a little different. I'm looking and if I'm missing something too, I apologize. But I'm concerned about the attendance data that I'm looking at. And this is apparently some schools are already on a 4-day week. Would that be right? Because there's Wendover High School, Anna Smith, IBAPA, Dugway, Vernon, and the 21-22 school year. And if you tell me you kind of get that COVID get out of jail free card, but if you tell me that's about COVID, that might help. But those attendance numbers are not good. And can you help me understand that?
Correct. And I believe Dugway's is wrong. I looked at that again this morning. I went, oh, that's not correct. That is, and I need to I was working on that this morning to double check that. And I can't, and internet's hard here. But so when we look up Dugway on Data Gateway, there's two things, because even though they're all in one K-12, it's, split with elementary and secondary. So I believe that should be 87%. So all of them, if you look at that attendance data, they're getting back up there after COVID, except for IBAPA. And IBAPA last year, it was still a COVID thing. They have a lot of the go shoots that there was COVID still going around, and they were still very much, wearing their masks and still keeping their kids home because of worrying about getting COVID. I think it's a lot better this year as I've been out there. But there are some families that are still worried about COVID.
I'm concerned because and I've been looking at these 4-day weeks for, my gosh, 25 years probably. And one of the ideas is that there isn't good attendance on Friday, on the 5th day. And so if we move to 4 days, there'll be spectacular attendance because everything else goes to Friday. All the family activities and appointments and stuff like that. But then when I see that there are already schools on the 4-day week and their attendance is not good, it makes me feel like we're not doing our job in saying we need to get these kids to school so we can teach them. And so I'm concerned about that. And I also, we have the data on your student achievement, but it is so teeny that I can't read it. But so just give me a snapshot of the schools that are currently on the 4-day week. Has their achievement improved or at least stayed the same? And I know we've got this weird COVID middle years right now, but still, can you speak to that for a minute? So
You
you're a
bet.
little bit, go ahead. The achievement data is the most important.
Yes. So, I will maybe just kind of start with some of the elementaries and go down. So, when we look at like our Acadians, the if you look at from beginning of the year to mid-year on, so IBAPA is a little bit different, and IBAPA is one that we are working hard with. They have a great administrator and Mrs. Ruiz, and they were in school turnaround and they worked with UEPC and they did exit school turnaround. It was they were in CSI last June. However, there's still, when you look at their data, we have some things where we have our concerns, and we are still working on some things, and we are seeing improvements. I did email another packet with some of those questions on how we can help student achievement and things. And that was one of the things on there with continuing working with UEPC. But one of the things the administrator did with them this year was change their schedule so that it was more instructional time in literacy and in math, and providing, the year before there wasn't an aide, so that aide was gone, and now we have 2 aides out there, and we have extra time where we have interventions, and so we have more of that tier 2, tier 3 time. We have the instructional coach going out there more often. We are doing something in our area this year that I feel like's been a success. So between the elementary, so Anna Smith, Vernon, Ibapaw, and Dugway, we are doing a virtual collaboration, and they've been collaborating on literacy and math. And we are having them focus on our district instructional framework and working on that together. So one of the things we look at with our Acadians data, as far as Vernon and Dugway, when you look at their data from the beginning of the year to mid-year, you will usually see a huge rise in their scores. Dugway used some of their trust lands or TSSA money this year to hire an aide for literacy. And so they are seeing great results by mid-year of growth with their scores going up. We usually celebrate in our district, and Dugway and Vernon are usually right up there mid-year of some of our highest and most improved schools. Anna Smith they are some of the most motivated, excited teachers with wanting to teach. And my whole Grantsville area, we collaborate, and the city schools as well, working with these outlying schools on focusing on the essential outcomes and looking at data and the standards. And I know that the principal and the instructional coach are pulling those teachers in and looking at their data weekly and really focusing in and narrowing it down to the student. So they are just really focused minute by minute on the core subjects and essentially what needs to be done. And we've also been working with our district teaching and learning teams, and they are going out and helping, as well as our SPED department. So that's
Angie,
some of the things.
Yo, Angie.
Sorry.
we appreciate, I mean, we know good things are happening.
Yeah.
We've had conversations about some of these schools in the past, specifically Ibapaw. We are impressed by what Tooele County School District is doing for the academic to the student. We obviously have concern, as does the county. Member Lear does have a follow-up
Yeah,
question.
and you can just tell me
Okay.
in 25 words or less kind of type of a question. My other
Sorry.
concern, well, no, you're giving us helpful information moving forward. I'm just concerned that what I see on paper doesn't necessarily, I know you have high aspirations. I'm concerned that taking away instructional time, and I'm hard pressed to say to a community, this is what we've all jointly decided we want to do and it's good for us. So I'm hard pressed to say no, but I feel like board member, I have to be responsible and at least push against that if it looks like it's not, if I see it's disadvantaging students. But my last question has to do with students with disabilities. Have you given consideration to how you adequately serve those? What's your percent? You have a overall, I think, as I recall, Tooele had a higher percentage of students with disabilities. Am I remembering right? And or have you considered how those services will be consistent with their IEPs?
That's a great question. And so we have a new SPED director this year, and we have two an elementary and a secondary SPED director under her. We've kind of done that different division, and they are right on it. And they are driving out with me when I do those visits or separate visits. And we've had many conversations with the administrators. I've invited them in on my breakouts for administrators to ask questions, and we are working on things. And honestly, we are seeing some more SPED students moving out to Dugway. And we just did a switch in our psychologist out to Anna Smith, and he is driving out there on a weekly basis. So we've made some changes in how we're doing that already so that we can make sure that they are getting those services and what they need.
And it would be okay, I guess, if we ask Dr. Voorhees over the special ed department, if she maybe could work a little more closely with you or her staff members, so that I just am concerned when we go to 4-day weeks that kids who are already struggling and in faraway areas are not getting what they're entitled to under federal law. So that's what worries me most. So thank you for your answers. It sounds like you've got great
Absolutely.
plans. Thank you.
Thanks, Angie. Member Wood?
Yep.
Just a question, do you use any of the Fridays for teacher collaboration or bringing students in, or are they completely non-academic and are the buildings even open on Fridays at all?
Yes, that's a great question. And so we sit down and we do a calendar, and so some of them, it varies by school and they turn that in, but they try to stay consistent. So like Wendover High and Anna Smith and Ibapaw, they'll do a TSSA day collaboration once a month, or that's when they may have their parent teacher conferences. So they'll do some type of a PD on those Fridays. So yes, they may look at data. I know some of them have had UEP. That's when when they're working with UEPC, that's when they've had them come out. So yes, they are using Fridays for that.
Awesome. Follow-up,
Thank
Chair?
you. Oh, sure.
So do you engage with students like online, like some remote learning on those Fridays? Have you taken advantage of that with the distance that kids travel at all? Or is it mostly trying to get them into the building if you're doing something?
You know, Wendover High does some of that, but they mostly try to do at the end of the day. They have a pride time where they're trying to do some of that credit recovery then, but they have done some of that on Fridays. But that's a good idea, that maybe some more of that. But we try to get them in the building as much. And I will tell you, there's been a little bit of talk because in our district, you've maybe seen, I know at some of our board meetings, like talking about the early release day in the Valley cities. So these teachers have thought about that themselves as far as the elementaries and their early release Thursday. And they're like, so, coming up future, they're like, kicking that around for a little bit of, whatever happens with this, then maybe they adjust on Thursday. The high schools, the secondaries go longer than the elementary on Thursday, but yeah.
Great, thank you.
As you and the board, the Tooele County School District Board, and we recognize Board Member Smith online with us. We hope that you keep a strong focus on academics, of course, for your students. And to some of Member Lear's comments, we are concerned greatly about the students that are out there. We know that a 4-day work week is a convenience for families, but we also value education, as do you. And so we're just making sure that our students are being educated appropriately. And some of the scores on the data are quite shocking. We see that you're working hard to bring those up, and so we commend you for that. But there's always concern when we remove seat time or learning time from an individual student. So I appreciate that. With that, I'd be seeking a motion from the committee. Member Hart.
Yeah. Sorry, I should have been prepared.
On the screen.
Oh, I move that the committee approve Tooele County School District's request for waiver renewal under R277121 and forwards to the board for approval.
Any discussion to that motion? Member Lear?
Just one more question. So when would we, never mind, we won't just talk about that. When will we see this again for a renewal or a review, or when is that set up? That might be an Ashley question.
AAG Beal?
It is, yes. So I currently have it drafted as a 3-year contract or renewal, but as always, it is noted that the board can request data on an annual basis or ongoing updated information on an annual basis.
Oh, I like that. I like that. I don't know if it's an addition or what, but I like to be able to check maybe in after 2 years, because we'll be out of the COVID shadow then, and maybe we can get information that is more helpful for us in evaluating the student achievement. So thank you for that. Thank you for that answer.
So that wouldn't require an amendment to the motion. That's just something that Ashley, can you make note of that and or staff make note of
Yes,
that and make sure
it's
it
already
comes back?
existing in the
Oh,
drafted agreement.
yeah, thank you.
No
Thank you.
problem.
Perfect. Okay. So the motion on the floor is that the committee approves Tooele County School District's request for a waiver renewal under R277-121 and forwards to the board for approval. Committee members, please, all in favor say aye.
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 Okay, aye, that passes unanimously. Thank you, Angie. Thank you, Member Smith. Our next agenda item
Thank you
is
very much.
Our next agenda item is item 3.3, Utah Adult Education Policies and Procedures Guide, incorporated by reference into R277-733. And we have Stephanie Patton with us here, who can set us up and answer any questions that we have.
Good morning, Stephanie Patton, Adult Education Coordinator. So we came in front of you a couple of months ago with the same request. We have amended based on feedback. We've met with directors and some of the members of this committee. And we did change in this amended document, we changed back to 40 hours of testing. Everything else is the same for post-tests. Most of the changes are to align with the assessment policy that we have to submit to the Office of Career Technical and Adult Education at the federal level, and also based on monitoring changes. So do you need more?
I don't, but I've been part of those meetings, so I'm
Okay.
going to turn it over to the committee for any questions.
Okay.
This has been before us. I'm not surprised if there's no questions. It's been before us before. Can you explain why we went back to 40 hours and what some of the concern that the adult education, they're not coordinators, directors
program
had,
directors.
and why we went back to 40, and then kind of explain, I don't know if it was in backup. There was a Google Doc that Deputy Norman put together. It was wonderful. It answered a bunch of questions. It was more casual, so it's not here in backup. It was part of the meeting that we had. But can you just kind of go over that briefly to give some context to that meeting so that they understand why we went back to 40 and what we've done since last time we met?
Yeah, for sure. So in board meeting, right, when it was before the board, there was some public comment and concerns expressed by board members, right, that the 40 hours was not providing the flexibility that was needed for students who finished early before 40 hours, right? So we went back and we looked at, we listened to directors, right? In two different meetings, actually. I had an adult education advisory committee meeting that consists of 15 different directors, right? And had a discussion there with them. In addition, board members, Hymas and Hart, instigated an additional meeting with, I think, 5 or 6 other program directors where we discussed the 40 hours. So as part of that, and looking at guidelines from the National Reporting System on a federal level that creates guidelines for testing and, standardized testing and how to report all of the outcomes that we have to report on a federal level, right? We looked at that. 40 hours really is pretty much the minimum, right, recommended by the National Reporting System. And so that allows us to give them as much flexibility as possible.
Thank you so much. It was Member Norton. Were you there?
Yeah, no, it's Member Norton.
Member Norton was there.
That's okay.
Sorry.
Just a quick, yeah.
I would have gone if you wanted me.
Anyway,
I did know that. Yes.
we appreciate the time that has gone into this. We feel like it's I feel like it's in a good spot for the USBE and for adult education directors. It'll be good moving forward. So if there are no questions, Member Hart.
Yeah, I move that the committee approve the update to the Utah Adult Education Policies and Procedures Guide incorporated by reference into R277733 and forward to the board for approval.
Thank you. The motion on the floor is that the committee approves the update to the Utah Adult Education Policies and Procedures Guide incorporated by reference into R277-733 and forwards it to the board for approval. All in favor say aye.
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 Aye, that passes unanimously. That leads us into our next agenda item, 3.4. This is R277-733, Adult Education Programs. And we are going to hear from Angie, or Deputy Stallings.
Yes, just good morning, everyone. Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent Policy. Just as a reminder, this policy and procedures guide is incorporated by reference into the rule. So the only change that we're making to R277-733 is to update the rule to reference the updated manual. And that's all the background.
Okay, that's a simple one. Any questions? Member Hart?
Yeah, I have a question, Deputy Stallings. Is there a way to write this so that if a guide changes, we don't have to change the policy? No?
The answer is no,
Okay.
because the policy and procedures guide now has the effect of law. What we do is we file the Office of Administrative Rules requirements, requires us to update the rule every time we update the policy, and we file them
Oh.
both together so that when
Okay.
the rule is getting public comment, the public actually can see the policy and procedures
I
guide as
see.
well. It's essentially, because essentially what we're doing is instead of putting it in rule format, it's all in the guide, and then the
Okay.
public comment is not only on the rule, but it's also on the guide.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Just trying to
Yeah.
streamline.
It's about the transparency to the public
I-
to be able to see.
And
that- yeah.
you know, the other way would be, do we have to, can't it just be one thing? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was just wondering. With that, I'd like to make a motion
Please.
that the committee approve R277733 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Any discussion to that motion? Seeing none, the motion that on the floor is that the committee approves R277-733 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All committee members in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that passes unanimously. Thank you.
You can speak to this one. Right?
Okay, next on the agenda is item 3.5, R277-320, Grow Your Own Teacher and School Counselor Pipeline Program. And Deputy Stallings is going to queue us up for that.
Yeah, thank you. As a reminder, or maybe in the background, it does explain, and Lisa is also here and will be available to help answer questions. But this last session, HB 190 expanded the scope of the Grow Your Own program to include 2 additional license areas for school social worker and school psychologist, in addition to school counselors and educators. And so the rule is really just being updated based on the passage of HB 190 to include those 2 additional groups of individuals who could participate in the Grow Your Own program. And so the main changes are on lines 18, beginning on line 18. The interesting thing is normally we would just point to a definition in the code, but the code does not define like an eligible candidate, or so it just states that teachers or individuals who are seeking to become a teacher, a school counselor, a school social worker, or a school psychologist are eligible. And so this was our way to make it simpler so that we could reference grant program candidate or candidate throughout the body of the rule.
Thank you, Deputy Stallings. Member Hart, you have a question?
There's some other lights.
Member Carries, your light has been on for a minute. I don't know if it's okay.
I know this is really ticky-tacky, and truly, you can make fun of me on this, but we call it educator pipeline. Why aren't we calling it an education professional pipeline? Because sometimes a education psychologist, and so there's an answer. Excellent.
Dr. Height, please.
Yes, I'm Malia Height, Executive Coordinator of Educator Licensing. Within our educator licensing structure, we call them educators.
Fair. That answers that.
Quick and easy.
And the other answer I would add is that's the title they gave the programming code. So we could request them to change, but the official title of the program is Grow Your Own Educator Pipeline Program.
Just for the record, there are some psychologists and education psychologists, counselors, and social workers that would object to the educator title, but education professional.
If they want an educator license.
I understand.
Okay, we are gonna, Member Lear has a question and then we'll go to Member Carey.
And I just have a syntax question. It just feels a little, I don't know what the word is, colloquial to say up to $150,000 instead of in an amount not to exceed. for a rule. And is that standard language or, I mean, that just doesn't read very well for me.
I believe it is actually the OAR rule writing style guide that does say to say up to. They've been much more involved in the last year in correcting our language that we use and in a lot of ways they like the shorter version of the same thing. So instead of saying including but not limited to, you just say including. And so yeah, that's why.
And, right, okay, and I can live with that, I guess. On line 118, I also had a question. Let me see if that got rethunk. Just a minute. Let's see, sorry. Shall incorporate opportunities on parentheses C were available. Okay, that's fine. Okay, thank you, yes.
Let's
I'm
move
good.
to Vice Chair Carey, then if you have, we can come back. Vice Chair Carey.
So are these grants already being made available to these individuals and we're just adding this language for clarification, or are we expanding the nature of the program?
We're expanding the nature of the program. So currently school social workers and school psychologists have not been eligible to participate, or those seeking to become a school social worker or school psychologist. So this is due to the passage of legislation this last session, which will now expand the scope of who might be eligible to participate in the program.
So does the legislation say that these categories are now open and that funding will be made available or could be made available?
So they did appropriate $7.1 million one time. And I don't know, Lisa, because I am anticipating some of these questions might be things that you might know best. But the legislature originally appropriated about 7.1 million, I believe. Was it how much? 9 million? Do you want to, because I hate to, when we have an expert in the room on the program, so it sounds like 9 million originally. I believe that over 2 years, they thought that was going to be enough for 3 years, but the
demand was
so high. But there was an additional 7.1 million appropriated in this last session. Yeah.
Angie is correct. So it was 9 million in 20.
Will you introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm
please?
sorry. Lisa McLaughlin. I'm educator preparation coordinator at Utah State, the State Board of Education. And the original appropriation in 2020 was 9 million for 2 cohorts that would expand 3 years. And then this year we got an additional 7 million for an additional 2-year cohort. And the 9 million was mostly appropriated during that first year because we had such a high demand. And then there was about 7 million that was appropriated that first year. And then cohort 2 got an additional funding for the rest of it. So we're excited to get 7 million for an additional cohort because the demand was really high.
Can I ask a question to piggyback off of Vice Chair Carey's? The one time always makes me nervous, but I get that money pockets are only so deep, right? Do we have a plan for ongoing, or is it hopefully the legislature gives us money, right? What are we looking at here? I'd hate to cut this short after a year.
The board did request ongoing funding in our business case, but we only received one-time funding, so we will probably be asking the legislature again next year for additional funding.
Yeah, and just as a reminder, and again, Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, it wasn't one of the board's top 10. It was one of the 24. So that might be why the ongoing, why we got one time versus ongoing. But if the board were to, prioritize it higher or focus on it more, it might be something that let me just share that one of the things why I see the legislature, I'm not trying to play a legislator on TV, but I'm channeling that why they might be making the decision they've made is because these are 2-year cohorts, meaning you can plan for funding for 1 to 2 years. And then if you don't have money beyond that, it's not like funding for salaries, ongoing salaries. And so I could see why the legislature would focus their ongoing funds to support the WPU or programs that are actually paying for salaries, where while the 7.1 million can be used to support salaries, it's only for the 2 years that student is engaged in their education to get the license. So I'm not saying we want one time. I know that as staff and the business case shows that high demand, it would be good to have an ongoing pot of money to support this. But I also understand why this program has been funded one time, because there's not, you could end it after a cohort.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, and the top 10, I mean, that's tough as board members. We wish it was like top 100, like the music chart or something, but we have a question from Member Wood, and then we'll go back to Member Lear.
So it looks like from the fiscal note that it wasn't given any money. The bill wasn't. Do you know whether this was a PEA priority, or did executive add it in the last? So kind of as we move forward to know what their priorities are, I'd be interested if any of you have that granular detail. Where did the money get inserted finally with no fiscal?
Deputy Stallings is looking up something. Okay, here she's ready.
Well, my guess is it was an HB2, and I'm just looking, was it?
Yeah.
That's what I thought. Let's see.
So it just came in at the last.
Here it is. Yes, it's line 770 in HB2. It's 7.15 million. So 7,150,000 was appropriated to the Grow Your Own Teacher and Counselor Pipeline, which program is how they've listed it in HB2.
Perfect. Do you know if it was a public ed, a priority? Do you know if it came out of public ed appropriation?
I can't remember. Do you remember if it was a public ed appropriations recommendation? I could look that up quickly.
I can look it. I will look it up. I was just curious if you had that detail. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Member Wood. Member Lear.
Yes, I just lost my train of thought. Oh, shoot. Oh, okay. I mean, this is a Malia question, perhaps. When these individuals get these licenses, is it an LEA specific license?
No, so when they finish their programs, they were recommended by their university programs for a professional license.
Because that's right. They're going through
It's
a
a
university
university.
program that's subsidized.
Correct.
That's right. Oh, I feel lots better about that. Thank you. That's it. Thank you for the reminder.
We're going to go back to Deputy Stallings. She has the answer that Member Wood was seeking.
Yes, I was able to find out that under the Public Education Appropriations Subcommittee's recommended items, the Grow Your Own Teacher and School Counselor Pipeline Program was listed number 6 on the one-time priorities for 14.3 million. So that was their recommendation, was for double the amount of funding, but also still one time.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Member Hart.
You are speedy.
You're speedy.
I don't think this is, I very much wanted this program, and I wanted it to be in the top 10. It as a practitioner, this has attracted candidates to stay in education and grow. And as someone that started as a paraprofessional and then was a substitute teacher and then was a teacher before an administrator, that kind of depth of knowledge and experience really helps you in the next part of your education career. So I can't speak highly enough about the program. As to the rule, I really appreciate the additions on line 76, 78, 81. I think these are very thoughtful additions, making sure that the school administrator is making a recommendation for it, rather than somebody not at the school site. I also am very supportive that the needs of the LEA. So there's some customization here that I really value and appreciate. So thank you for those changes.
Thank you. With no other questions, I'd be seeking a motion, or I'd be happy to.
I mean, I don't want to hog the motions, but I would love to make this one For sure.
Please.
I move that the committee approve R277-320 Draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Any additional discussion to the motion? Seeing none, the motion on the floor is that the committee approves R277-320 Draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, it passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, moving on. Thank you. Moving on to item 3.6, R277-930, English Language Learner Software. This is a repeal, and Deputy Stallings is going to cue us for this.
Yes. So this repeal of R277-930 is also related to legislation that passed this last session, HB 154. And based on the fact that all of the requirements are in code, staff have reviewed it and determined that the rule is no longer necessary and that the statute stands for itself. And recommending repeal.
Seeing no questions, I'm happy to make a motion on a repeal at any time. I move that the committee repeal R277-930 on first reading and recommend the board repeal the rule on second and final reading. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that passes unanimously. Thank you. Let's move on to item 3.7, R277-400, School Facility Emergency and Safety. And again, Deputy Stallings will cue us up, and we also have Rhett Larson here for any questions as well.
Yes, thank you. So again, many of the rules today that the committee is hearing are being brought to you as a result of legislation that passed. So both, I believe that this one is being updated because of HB 140, but also SB 61 as well, although that wasn't listed in the background, but both of those bills impact R277-400. And, you know, I'm doing my best Ben impression because Ben really worked with Rhett very closely to update this rule. And Rhett, of course, is the subject matter expert in the area, but the rule is making quite a few changes. And I don't know if Rhett, would you like to give a summary of the changes, if that's okay?
Please. Yes.
Okay.
And introduce yourself, please.
Thank you. So Rhett Larson, School Safety Specialist for the Utah State Board of Education. So school safety was a hot topic at the legislature this year, and appreciate the dedication and attention to school safety. Out of House Bill 61, which is Representative Wilcox, and then 140 with Representative Johnson, there were some changes that were made that are reflective in rule. One is that LEAs will adopt standard response protocol. And the phrase standard response protocol is trademarked and owned by the I Love You Guys Foundation, which is hold, secure, lockdown, evacuate, and shelter. It is majority of our LEAs already use the I Love You Guys Foundation materials. It's free for our LEAs, but the benefit of that and where it also stemmed from is a takeaway. Last year, a month after the horrific events in Uvalde at Robb Elementary, we had the opportunity to attend a conference in Texas where we took administrators, including superintendent, with us. And something that Texas, Indiana, and other school states are doing is standardizing protocol and the I Love You Guys Foundation. And the reason for that is, if you remember last week, the horrible hoaxes that took place, it takes multiple responding agencies. If a school, if there were to be a tragedy like that actually happened at a school, even the hoaxes, it took a lot of responding agencies. And that will allow there to be common language across the state. So no matter what school a law enforcement agency or first responding agency goes to when they're in lockdown, it means the same thing. So it's the same expected practices. So I'm very much excited for that common language to be across the state as we continue to learn from other states who have had these horrific events. Another one of those, so that's reflective in this rule. You'll see in there that there are a lot of green and crossed out items. What that is there's been some confusion in the past between statute and rule regarding emergency drills like fire drills, and the state fire marshal oversees the fire drills and evacuation drills. There have been changes this year, and instead of updating our rule and having two places, just referring LEAs to go to statute and follow what is outlined in statute regarding emergency drills. And so we feel that would be best just to refer them to statute. The School Safety Center is also planning to do some supportive resources, so work with Barbara Fuentes to kind of pull it together, give them some supporting documents to help them understand what is really now expected of me with drills with these changes. Any questions about, I know I've talked a lot so far, so my apologies.
Well, keep going and
Okay.
we'll.
You bet. Another change is every school will designate a school safety specialist. And there is some confusion in the field as to what that means. So we've been working on some talking points and supportive documents or supporting resources around that. And I think it stems from originally the first substitute of House Bill 61. They were trying to put school resource officers in every secondary school in the state. That was removed, and the school safety specialist reflects what was supported in a business case by the board for the School Safety Academy. In Indiana, which is the gold standard in school safety across the nation, they have what's called a School Safety Academy. They required every school to identify an employee to be designated as the school safety specialist. Those individuals attend the state level training, and they've all created this baseline of school safety across the state. In school safety, we do not want to be in different areas. We all want to be on the same page as we are talking best practices. So that's what the Academy helps do. In Utah, we wanted to have funded mandates. We wanted to honor the teachers or school employees who would be the designated school safety specialist and give them a stipend for those additional responsibilities. That individual will be a support to the administrator on school emergency response plans. As outlined in statute, they will be part of threat assessment, which now threat assessment is a requirement in every school. I am excited about that. The U.S. Secret Service says the number one thing schools can do to prevent targeted school violence is threat assessment. So I'm excited that we are aligning to best practices. That individual will also help support ensuring that there's compliance, such as the drills are being practiced, the standard response protocol have been updated. But also what I hope is that individual will help inform stakeholders, parents on what the school is doing for school safety measures. We received a lot of calls from concerned parents thinking that the schools are not taking enough measures. We know administrators take school safety seriously. So just being able to have that extra support and sharing out to the community, however that looks, I think is a great support to stakeholders.
Yeah, we have a few questions.
I'm
Do we
sorry.
wanna- I think he's almost finished going through the entire document. Let's get through that and then we'll come back for questions.
You bet. Part of that threat assessment is having a multidisciplinary team who implements threat assessment. That's critical to pull together a team to make those determinations if a threat is serious or not serious, not leaving it up to one person, which is generally the administrator, just to make that. It's good to have a team approach that involves school resource officers as needed. Obviously the administrator, school-based mental health, and special ed as needed as well. Continuing on in this, we were asked by 140 by Representative Johnson. I should have said this in the beginning and my apology there. We were asked to define developmentally appropriate as well as active threat. So you will see that starting on in definitions, and definition starts on line 18.
Thank you so much. We do have a few questions. I'm going to ask a question really quick. What are the 4 terms that you used at the beginning? Let me, yeah, I can't remember what they were.
School safety specialist?
No, they
Threat
were
assessment?
like lockdown.
Oh, hold, evacuate, lockdown, evacuate, and shelter.
No, because I appreciate this. I've heard hard lockdown, soft lockdown, shelter in place, and a few others that it's like, what does that even mean? Right. And so if you're trying to work with law enforcement or any other agency to get help, trying to define that in a moment for each LEA is going to be very difficult. So I truly appreciate this coming together and us working together as a state so that we can eliminate confusion and get responses much quicker and get help much quicker. So here's the order that I have for questions, and you're in the hot seat here. We have a few. I have member Wood first, and then member Lear, and then Vice Chair Carey.
Okay.
Thank you. And thank you for all your work on this. I do love that we're going to have this throughout the state. One question, just because this is only my 4th law and licensing meeting. How did the multiple drafts come about? You ended up with draft 1, draft 2, draft 3. How do you? That's just a learning question on my.
That you, Deputy Stallings, or
Brett might know more.
Brett?
Okay,
Go
to
ahead,
answer
please.
that?
Yes.
As we continue to meet as a school safety center and meet with Ben as we comb through 61, and as we looked at, okay, what are the changes? What do we need to implement in rule? But also, it was a surprise to me. I did not know they had updated the emergency evacuation and fire drills because it is not under the state school board. It came as a surprise to many of us, and so we wanted to make sure we updated and included that as it would be necessary for 400. So it's a lot of that back and forth dialogue as we learned more, just making sure we were getting it to more of a perfect draft for you to review.
Perfect. Okay, and then one final question. Under
Sure.
prevention and intervention, 181, you talk about evidence-based threat assessment, but then down in 189, it says suggest referrals to evidence-informed resources. Can you help me understand the difference and what that does for us?
You bet. Can I respond to that, Chair?
Please.
Okay, so in 2019, if I can give some context, in 2019, the legislature created the Student and School Safety Assessment Bill. That created also the Utah State Board of Education School Safety Center. Part of that bill was for us to go and look for threat assessment and make that available. In looking at threat assessment, the only evidence-based school threat assessment out there is the Comprehensive School Threat Assessment Guidelines, or CSTAG, that was developed by Dr. Dewey Cornell. It is nationally recognized. It is a very good program. It has a great research for threat assessment. In 2020, the board put their stamp of approval when they were still doing the vetting process on CSTAG, and is reflective in the next rule that we're going to talk about repealing. But evidence-informed and evidence-based, I'm not sure whether, but it's an evidence-based threat assessment. And does that help? Did I help answer your question?
Member Wood?
Well, that clearly defines what the evidence-based is, but what's the difference in terms, why would we use evidence-informed resources as opposed to evidence-based?
It is interesting. Yeah, it is interesting to Member Wood's point. Even evidence-informed is an addition, a new addition. So why not use evidence-based in both areas? And maybe they are synonymous. I don't know. Did I miss something?
They're both,
Please.
if I may, they're both terms that are defined in code. I think it was Amy that specifically suggested we use that term, and she's down in finance.
Yes.
She's probably the best one to address that question, but they're both terms that are defined in code, and that's what we were basing the change on, is the definitions used in code.
Yeah, so multiple folks helping support in this draft. So I think it's fine if we were just to keep with evidence-based.
And so you can make that non-sub amendment, actually. If it's the same phrase, then just fix it.
Yeah, I don't know. And Member Wood, if you're seeking to amend this, or if it is.
Well, actually, I mean, I feel like many times the words that are chosen are very intentional, and I would just love to understand the difference. I I don't have the expertise to say,
There is no-
I like mine better. I would rather, understand the difference.
We may have one more, we have another staff member who might be able to shed some light on this, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, thanks.
Please.
Thank you. Chantel Cota, Coordinator of Safe and Healthy Schools. May I go ahead and respond to
Please,
that?
yes.
So as Ben had mentioned, so evidence-based is in code, and I can go ahead and read that definition for you. And it really comes down to effect size. So evidence-based means a strategy that demonstrates a statistically significant effect of at least 0.40 effect size on improving student outcomes based on strong evidence from at least one well-designed and well-implemented experimental study, as the state board further defines, or moderate evidence from at least one well-designed and well-implemented quasi-experimental study, as the state board further defines. Evidence-informed means a strategy that is developed using high-quality research outside of a controlled setting in the given field, as the state board further defines, and includes strategies and activities with a strong scientific basis for use, as the state board further defines. So there is a little bit of a difference there in terms of, the scientific effect.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Member Wood, any follow-up to that? I'm gonna have to read it 6 times in order to find the differences, but
No, I appreciate that, because when we're dealing with resources, we may not have, the studies that actually have all this data behind them. And we wouldn't want to exclude things that could be helpful.
right.
So I appreciate that difference. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Member Lear.
And one of these, well, I want to follow up to Leanne's question first. Do you believe that the folks who have to implement this understand the difference? Is this, because I know some people will say, well, rules aren't really for normal people to read, but they are. This puts a lot of responsibility on LEAs to put together committees, and so I think that this has to be understandable and language that experts in your field would understand. So do you feel like those that you work with understand the difference?
May I respond to that, Board Member Henderson? I can't speak for those in the field, but I can explain it in a much simpler way that I think will probably help. And it's that
You don't need to re-explain it to
Oh,
me. I'm
right,
just
sure.
concerned that and not because I'm so smart, just because I don't have to implement it.
No, I understand. And so the way that it's been explained, maybe that's a better way to state it, is that evidence informed allows us to use a practice that is not part of an experimental study. So that allows for, like, for example, the I Love You Guys Foundation. So when we're looking at the standard response protocols, it's evidence informed in that it's been in practice, it's been used, but it's, we don't have to refer to those statistical analysis. And so that's the way that it's been explained to our LEAs. And,
And you
I
think
hope that they,
And even, yes, I think they get it. It
Yeah.
would be,
yes, I
would
think
be
they
okay.
get it. And just going back to Rhett's point, in that so many are using, for example, the I Love You Guys because of that evidence informed approach.
And then I have several other, again, they seem like syntax questions, but in the spirit of, I want LEAs to be able to understand this and be able to do this, not just throwing a bunch of, because to be really blunt, I think this is all window dressing. I mean, what we really need to do in fixed schools, people know, but they won't do it. So I'm respectful, but I don't think this is the hard core of the problem. But I'm in this state, I'm pretty much there's only a few of us that think that way. So I want to just say that I'm respectful of what you're doing and what we're trying to do, but I don't think we're getting to the heart of the problem. But anyway, I want LEAs to actively be able to do this stuff and not just, oh, we need to form 4 committees and it needs to have these very prescriptive members. And that's not easy when you're an IBAPA, or it's really easy if you're in Alta High School, but not easy if you're in IBAPA or, Grouse Creek or someplace like that. So these questions are more geared at helping those LEAs get a committee in place that works for their schools. With that introduction. And so on line 70, it says, it's talking about the committee shall consist, and I'm looking to say if line 70 at the end should be an or instead of an and, so that they can choose.
No.
Which one are you?
I
Draft
Sure.
2, and so I may be a little off on
Yeah,
lines.
we're just trying to make
so
sure that
draft
we're
3
on
is the
same.
current draft.
Okay, and I am
So
in,
line 70 is correct though in that.
you want it to have exactly those
Well, no, it's a may include, and that's why we use and, because it's.
The committee shall consist of appropriate, and which may include, got it. Okay,
so-
thank you, that's helpful. So that means they have some discretion there.
Yes.
Okay, and then again, similar question on line 104, without such, and the school, if authorized by the LA or school, and the school official determines the student is reasonably responsible, or notification is not practicable, or does it have to be both? Because this is a big deal in terms of notifying parents for, and that's on line 104 in my draft. So I
Ben,
don't
you
know
have
if it moved.
Response for that as well, or?
I did get that comment. I think we used the and.
So
The and was in there advisedly. Is there?
do you mean for it to be both things?
Can I speak?
Please.
Yes, and that was, that's been in 400 for quite some time.
Yes.
That wasn't changed from any of the legislation, but the and in there, I think, is important and gives that LEA a little bit more decision-making, because we're talking about the release of a student.
Right.
And so I do think it's good for them to have that and for them to make that determination based on the information that they have regarding that specific student and whether or not, so that would be my response. I think the and is
Okay.
important.
And above on line 101, it says assumed responsibility, and I'm kind of belaboring this because I think this is hard for administrators and sometimes teachers, and especially in a crisis or in even a tense situation. So when you say that the responsible person has been notified and assumed responsibility, what does that mean to you? Does that mean that there's been a written statement? Does it mean there's been a phone call? Does it mean there's the parent has literally been on the property and the school person is turned in? It doesn't matter if the kid's 16, kind of, no, never mind. But if he's 12, if he's 8, that's a problem.
Can I comment? So to me, I can answer this. I'm trying to figure out how to best answer this because it would look differently depending on the student, depending on the crisis or the situation. And I really think it's best for that administrator to determine what that looks like and what are the best or the best course of action regarding that specific, whether it be a call. And so I think that would be in addition to any release of a student in any situation of knowing, okay, what's taking place? Where are we releasing them? Can we release them? So I think that's why I'm having a hard time answering with matter of fact, because it's so broad and case by case. I think it's best left to the administrator.
But you're answering that you're saying you're comfortable leaving it to the administrator.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, can I comment on, and Member Hart might have a comment as well, just from practices that I have been a part of, is that you go through the student information system and you would contact those on that list. So it wouldn't be just any person that you felt, a responsible person. It would be person on that list. And then the LEA would hang on to that child until that person from the list came to get that. That's just one LEA experience from best practices from what I've seen. Is it's typically not, you look like you're okay, you only live 2 miles away, just run the whole way, right? You wouldn't do something like that.
Yeah, and I'm okay with the notification part. I'm less okay, or less, I'm a little uncertain about release. Right. Letting a kid
Yeah.
go. And every one of those school shootings you see,
Right.
one of the things they note, that the commentators note, is that there was pandemonium, that parents don't know where their kids are because, we have these protocols, but
Let's just get a quick response here as well.
Why I like this verbiage is because it then allows the LEA to make a policy off this rule that is appropriate for the LEA. So I do think that it is something that the LEA has to attend to and should consider in their policy making. And this allows that flexibility for the LEAs. And yes, the assumed responsibility is a kind of broad, not broad, but it is sort of nebulous. But then the LEA has the responsibility to figure out what that means to
And
them.
I'm okay. I'm fine with that. I just wanted to be sure that you thought about that.
That's the intention.
A couple more, Matt, is that okay?
Sure.
On line 116, and this just seemed like, possession and use of school keys, that seemed a little narrow. When I think some schools have access codes, some of them have other kinds of things. And that, again, may be tedious because I think people know what you mean, but should that be a little broader phrase?
Can I answer?
Please.
We could look at broadening that, because you're right, there are different access to schools, but this also includes keys to like the reunification site. So in making sure that there's access where there needs to be access, both at the school, whether that's keys or through a badging system, or I can't remember what these are. I think this is a badging system, but however that might be with access, but also making sure that there's access to the reunification site, which the majority in Utah, what we've talked about are other buildings, including churches, to have access to those to reunify students with parents.
And that same line phrase, this is another question for you, and I think Molly's point was a good one about there's some decision making at the local level too. But are these students ever released to volunteers? Or I mean, not the students released, but are playground aides, or I mean, maybe it's just in the moment, but is that okay or not? Or?
Can I answer that? So if we were to look at just a school shooting, if there were a school shooting and a school goes into lockdown, that's when they would apply reunification, where even in the hoaxes last week, one of the LEAs, the parents had to show identification to get their student. So in a shooting situation, reunification has to be followed and released to parent and following identification. Regarding other scenarios, and I think that again would go case by case and depending up to the school on who they release it to. But my experience coming from schools has also been they follow what's in the student information system and who's been designated as a parent or guardian. That's been my experience.
Okay, and I think it leaves to the locals to do what they think is best, I guess, in the moment. So I'm okay. I just want one more after that.
Oh.
Molly had something to say.
I do, having said, obviously we want LEAs to have flexibility, but I do appreciate much of the specificity, because when it's a crisis, you really, you lose a lot of control over the situation, because the community is so elevated emotionally, and to be able to rely on very specific policies gives you some control back. So I do appreciate things getting as specific as school keys and reunification, and I generally feel the same way as Member Lear. There's a lot of window dressing and policies that are or laws that are passed. However, the flip side of that is I remember when we had a tornado that went right next to the school that I was a principal at in Georgia, and parents, we actually were required to keep them safe. So if the parent was at the school, we could not allow them to leave. And that was like the rule, the law. But those parents wanted to leave anyway. They wanted to drive into the tornado because they wanted to get home. But I could say, no, this is actual, I cannot let you go. Now, at the end of the day, if they're going to walk out, they're going to walk out. But I could say, this is the rule. This is the law. So I do appreciate quite a bit of specificity in these cases, because really panicked humans act different than not panicked humans. So I do appreciate the specificity, even though I do think that long rules are cumbersome.
I just,
Member Leary, you have one more question and then
and I
Vice
think I'm
Chair
not going
Carey.
to worry about that, but I just want to say one more time, I think we're asking a lot of LEAs. It's super important. The stakes are very high, but I just would like to give, I don't want to just pile on these requirements when they're not getting any money for putting together these committees, and it's very hard. And we've seen with community councils, some schools can get volunteers at the yin yang, others, it's like, I have to have these very prescriptive, so we just won't do it at all. So I hope that there is sort of flexibility that's built into this process that actually gives a school what it needs and a community what it needs, not just the prescriptiveness of it.
How do
Thank
you, how do you keep an eye on that, by the way?
No, it's
And the
anecdotal.
needs on, right? I mean, it kind of is anecdotal, but how do you know? Does the LEA reach out to you and say, yeah, we're trying, but we're not doing it. We can't get there?
Regarding just school safety, right?
Yeah.
Well,
So that's an interesting question, and I appreciate your comments, Board Member Lear, as I really do think looking at the responsibility and requirements of schools and educators, and you're right, there is a lot new required for school safety that's come out of legislation. I am, however, very excited that we are aligning to best practices. Already, when a threat is made, an administrator has to pull together and determine if that threat is serious or not. I'm glad that they will be able to have a team approach and an evidence-based process to follow to determine if it's serious or not serious. Not just leaving it up to one person to make that decision, I think is important. So I think it's just reworking what they've been currently doing, but having processes in place that are proven and effective of keeping schools safe. I appreciate our ongoing dialogue through the School Safety Collaborative with stakeholders in the state, as well as at the national level. I know for the School Safety Center, I know on the collaborative, it is always considerations for admin and their time on their plate. I also I was very pleased with several responses from LEAs as we were even talking about standardizing standard response protocol is a big deal. There are schools who have practices in place and they've been practicing the certain terminology for years, and now they have to uproot and move to a different set of language or different key terms. But as I've had conversations with them, a lot of administrators and superintendents that I've talked with, they're okay with making the change because it is for school safety, the overall best picture for us in our state. So there are going to be some growing pains, absolutely. But I am excited for these growing pains, but I am very mindful of the added responsibility to our schools. So I am grateful. That's why we did the stipend for a school safety specialist to have a funded mandate.
I noticed that. Thank you.
Yep. And there are pieces in 61 that are not reflective in rule because we had enough information. For example, the gun detection software, the 75 million for grant. There are some other supports for schools for funding that has to be allocated to schools with lower student count. And so there is some support there, but the ongoing concern for administrators and their time, I think, is critical in all aspects and being mindful of them.
Thank you. Vice Chair Carey, then Member Wood has a question.
I just have a few questions, and I was looking at the wrong draft, so these numbers may not match up, but I think I'm on the correct draft now. Under line 19, what is the difference between immediate threat and imminent danger? Why aren't we using imminent in both? What is the logic or reasoning behind that differentiation in the immediate versus imminent?
So an immediate threat or imminent danger, to me, immediate threat still would take that, is the threat serious or not? It would still require a threat assessment process. So immediate threat still, again, like I said, needs to be determined. Imminent danger is active, like it's currently in place. It would move more towards, hey, this is being deployed in the moment. There's different reactions that need to take place in that moment. Imminent danger would be, let me just give an example. An immediate threat, a student says, hey, I'm going to, take a gun to school and I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. Imminent danger is the student brought a gun and is in the school with a gun, or came to the school with a gun and has it. Does that make sense? So there's different ways of looking at, so there's the threat and then imminent danger. So determining the seriousness there versus immediate reaction. Is there anything you would want to add to that?
May I respond as well? Yes, just to add on to that. So if you look at some of the definitions from, we work with DPS on some of this. So as Rhett had said, so we want both in there because we want to know if it's immediate, something that needs to be acted on, or something that's upcoming that needs action, but maybe not like an evacuation of a school, right? It may be that we get our team together and figure out what we do for threat assessment.
So give me an example of an imminent danger where you would not evacuate the school.
So imminent could be something that's
Well, I'm
anticipatory.
asking for
Mhm.
an example where you would have an imminent danger, but not find it necessary to evacuate the school.
Sure. Do you want me to take that one or? Go ahead.
Okay, so let's say there was on I-15, one of the tankers that had dangerous chemicals tipped, and you literally could not have anyone in the school building outside. In that situation, you shut down the HVAC system, you hold the students there, so that would be an imminent danger to the risk of the health of the students. Does that make sense? And so it's not just a situation with a gunman. Even the standard response protocols, it incorporates many different types of situations that could arise in or around a school that could cause danger or harm to kids or anyone in the school, not just students, but anyone in the school.
I mean, in law school, we always learned that imminent was related to time. And so I'm not sure I understand the timing difference between an immediate threat versus the time frame surrounding an imminent danger. Does that make sense?
I think it's in looking at the word threat and danger itself.
And I'm looking at the words immediate and imminent.
Yes.
What is your rationale for using two different words?
Ben, go ahead.
I was just going to point out, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my recollection as we were talking about how to define these was that one of the members of the school safety team found this in like an industry publication. So it's not something that we necessarily pulled out of legislation or that we're, absolutely glued to the use of this term imminent. I think that was kind of a standard definition that we found that's used in the industry, and we felt it was appropriate. But I don't think there's anything necessarily scientific to saying imminent as opposed to immediate.
So are you saying that you're using these words interchangeably? And if so, why not just use the same word?
We can, like he says, we're open to it. It was a collaboration with the School Safety Center, pull together resources. And so I'm open to any possible changes to that.
Okay. And then the term threat assessment is used throughout the language. Did we define threat assessment in the definition section?
Can I comment on that?
Please,
So
Brett.
student threat assessment is defined in rule in 100. Also in CSTAG itself, the threat assessment is a problem-solving approach to violence prevention that involves assessment and intervention with students who have threatened violence in some way. But at the time that we were looking at defining threat assessment, the board used this idea, but did make their own definition of student threat assessment that's reflective in 100. But I do not have that memorized, but I can go there if I need to.
But I guess that's
Terry, I've put that on the screen if that helps. That means a prevention strategy that involves identifying student threats, including to commit a violent act, determining the seriousness of the threat, and developing intervention plans that protect potential victims and address the underlying problem or conflict that stimulated the threatening behavior.
no, and I understand that's the definition of a student threat assessment, but we use the term threat assessment, not student threat assessment throughout this document. So my question again is threat assessment different than student threat assessment? And if not, why aren't we saying student threat assessment versus just threat assessment?
Can I answer that? So at the time that we were looking at defining student threat assessment, that was a conversation that came up. When you look up threat assessment and schools, there is programming, support, evidence-based research. When you look up student threat assessment, looks a little differently. So the board at that time chose to define student threat assessment that looks a little bit differently than threat assessment. But the way we use it in practice for threat assessment and student threat assessment is the same. So I'm not, I'll leave that up to, you as the board and legal, however you want to word that. If we leave it to student threat assessment, I hope the intention is still that we can use the evidence-based threat assessment that's out there and not just having to look for programs or guidelines that say student threat assessment. Does that make sense?
I wonder if to Vice Chair Carey's point here, in this definition, identifying student threats, including commit a violent act. If you remove student, then it's simply identifying threats, including to commit a violent act, right? I mean, I don't know how big the change is, but it goes beyond the student. Is that what you're looking at?
The way, exactly, we're expanding threat assessment to beyond student, right?
Just
Now-
a student.
Right, and if that's what we're
much
doing,
more
I
than that.
think we should be clear that that's what we're doing.
So I don't know what that looks like as far as an amendment to the rule, or if it's what it would do to the rule, what it would do to this whole process, if it would need to be come back, or if it's something that can be.
I think it would be more in line with what they're trying to accomplish, right? They're trying to go beyond the student saying, I believe what you're trying to say is there are threats to the school beyond what the student could do. And if that's the case, I think we need to define threat assessment. What does that
Is that
mean?
defining code?
Yeah, so it say, is there statutory language that uses one or the other?
To my knowledge, no.
So
So we could make the change here without.
Well,
that's
we
what I'm
could
wondering.
add a definition for threat assessment here. We can't change 100, the definition of 100 unless we brought that rule forward, but we could add a definition for threat assessment.
So is that something, Vice Chair Carey, that you feel would improve the rule or clarify the rule to?
I think it's a
LEAs?
material, I think it's material to everything we're discussing here. And I think we do need an operational definition that I will be the first to admit I am not qualified to come up with. So, I mean, I would defer to Ben and his team, but
So I think if we were defining it, we'd probably use that definition from R277-100, but just modify it to take out the term student. Is that what I'm understanding? So that it's a little broader?
yeah, and I would want the opportunity to meet with law enforcement on my end and constituents, just to make sure that, again, I was surprised that I just didn't see the definition of threat assessment. I did see student threat assessment. I did look that up. I don't believe that's the way we're using threat assessment in this proposed rule. But I would be open to reviewing any language that they could come up with. Moving along, if we could go to line 56. Yeah, and this could just be Angie's Deputy Stallings is always talking about this rule book of how we phrase things in rule and legislate, and this may be one of those, but it says here, presented to and reviewed by its teachers, administrators, students, and guardians. And I was wondering, why don't we say parents? Because we use parents about 9 times after line 57. But in line 57, we're just saying students and guardians. Why are we omitting parents from that protocol?
Guardians is part of the term parents in Rule 100. I'm not sure, we didn't change that at this juncture, so I'm not sure why they used guardians in the past. I don't think it would be an issue to change that to parents because that would encompass everything.
Right, because guardians, you can be a guardian, not be a parent, right? But the converse isn't true, but that's certainly true. So again, I have concerns with that, and I would make a motion at the end to strike guardian and substitute parent, unless there was a specific reason why it says guardian versus parent.
And I don't know, I could be wrong. I don't know if that, I had this question a year or so ago, and Ben answered it for me, and I don't know if it's requires an amendment or if it's just something because the definition of parent included guardians, is from what I understood.
Yeah, I've got that rule up, so I can show you. that,
Right, but but the problem is we're not using the word parent.
Right, so what I'm asking is if we can just make the change without needing an amendment, if it
Well,
means the same thing, or if we do need to
We can
make
make
it.
a quick amendment. to
Okay.
committee, and
That's
that
fine.
addresses it.
But it shouldn't change, yeah, so parent on 21, Vice Chair Carey, you can see up here, parent means a parent or guardian who is established, so we could use parent throughout.
Okay.
rather
And like
than
I said, the
guardian.
rest of the document we do.
Right.
So,
Okay.
and then line 187. And again, this is based off an earlier draft, so I just need to see if this is the same here.
You didn't make any change to that line.
Yeah, so again, this is just a reminder to me that again, we didn't define really what threat assessment means throughout this document. And even in this provision here with the addition, I think we use that term at least 3 times, but we've never really defined it.
And just make a
Rhett,
comment to that.
please.
So student threat assessment was the board's intention to define threat assessment at that time. So they just added the word student, but still it's the same meaning for the intent of the work for threat assessment. Just at that time, they wanted to add the word student, but it was their intent, or the intention then was to define threat assessment, but they added the word student at that time. But so threat assessment and student threat assessment, I think if we take out the word student, the definition still matches the actual work as mentioned. So that, I just wanted to make that comment.
Yeah, no, I understand. I'm just saying, if you remove the word student, you are broadening substantially how we interpret threat assessment, right?
I guess so can I speak to that for a second? If we remove the word student and broaden threat assessment, then we don't involve parents with parent, you know what I mean? Like as I'm thinking more about this, it's like, okay, this really is about the LEA over the student. The LEA has no domain over an outside individual, over a parent or guardian, right? They don't have processes in place to say, oh, you have to do this. They would still act, of course, if an emergency presented itself, they would still act. But I think in this rule, I'm seeing that student is more clear, offers more clarity to the LEA on what their responsibility is. If we remove that, that might cause some chaos, right?
It
Like
certainly
what am I-
expands the jurisdiction of
Right,
the
but
school.
but what do I do as an LEA now, right? Like I've got these processes to keep my students safe and to make sure that we follow these policies. But as soon as I remove that, then what?
So you want to add in student.
I want
on
to
line
keep,
187.
well, I want to keep the intent that Rhett is mentioning here. And if it means taking all the threat assessment and including student in front to go along with the definition, I think that would offer more clarity. I understand what Vice Chair Carey is saying here, right? This is important, and this has happened too many times. And so to broaden it, I get would be good, but I don't know how we do that to the LEAs at this point.
Sure. Can I comment?
Please.
So the U.S. Secret Service, they use the term threat assessment often in their averting targeted school violence manual. They will also use the term behavior threat assessment. So I think student threat assessment works. In the guidelines that we use, the evidence-based guidelines, they use it as comprehensive school threat assessment guidelines. So I can see how it could be advantageous to have student or school. But I see that where if you just use threat assessment, it does broaden it to different aspects. And so I'm just curious, it's just brought up the concern for me. I wonder in those other settings if they've had that same conversation, because threat assessment can involve even a building threat assessment. So.
And thank you, Chair. And that goes to my next area. If we go back to line 19, we talk about this immediate threat or imminent danger, and again, that may be a, what do they say, a distinction without a difference, right? But I think words matter, and we're using immediate and imminent, and especially if we're using them interchangeably, not a big deal. But this part I'm concerned about. It says a danger to the school campus community. What does that mean? What does that entail? Does that mean they have to be at school, or can somebody be at home or on their way home, they're walking home, or on their way to or from an athletic event sponsored by the school? What is school campus community? Because again, I did not see that definition. But if there's another definition in rule or policy of school campus community, I'm just concerned again that we're putting so much on the LEAs that now, what does that, my school district where my kids went, back east, we would get alerts all the time because somebody posted something on Instagram in their home that, they're going to beat someone up at school. Is that what we're talking about here? Like school campus community means you're a member of this community regardless of whether you're in class or at school or during school hours?
I think Ben can answer as a response to that.
Yeah, again, I don't think this is necessarily a term of art that we're gonna, fight to the death on. It's something that we came up with that we felt addresses the faculty, staff, the students. But if you think we need to, there's another word that better expresses that, I think we're certainly open to it, but I don't think this is, it's not defined, so it is something that gives leeway to the LEA interpreting it, but, we're certainly open to other alternatives.
And again, I'm asking questions. I just have concerns where I can certainly see, because I lived through this in Philadelphia, where the school is getting involved in activity that's not taking place at school during class time, during school hours. And we're getting email alerts all the time about this behavior, which I think is not part of what I would consider the school campus community. But if it's not defined and we do leave it open, I could see some LEAs maybe being a little bit overzealous in how they interpret that.
Ben?
I think you could easily cut that short and call it and just say danger to the school, facilities, or transportation systems. You could, if you don't like that word community, I think you could shorten it. Like I say, we're not glued to that word. I think we were just trying to come up with a definition for active threat, and that's kind of what was our first draft of it. But I think if you said immediate threat or imminent danger to the school, I think that would, that may even.
That would, let me
be fine.
Let me propose this, Vice Chair Carey. I know you have additional thoughts. I know Member Wood has been waiting with some questions as well. Do we have any amendments, or are you putting amendments together by chance, or is this something like, because these are great questions, I think that clarity needs to happen. So if you don't have an amendment, then I might have an amendment, but you know what I mean? Like, I think it needs to happen, but I want to move forward as well. So
I don't have an amendment per se, because really I was looking for the feedback.
Right. Okay.
Right. When we're talking about a bill about threat assessment, and I agree, I think that's at the core of what security is about. But when we don't define that, I'm not prepared to vote on a rule where the core issue that's at hand is not being defined.
Mm-hmm.
And where we use words like immediate and imminent interchangeably, where we use a phrase like school campus community, and there's no definition. To me, those are things that have to be addressed, I think, by the experts. I'm not prepared to define what a threat assessment is.
Right.
I think the stakes are too high. So I only have 3 more areas that I'd like to cover.
Okay.
Is that?
Let's get going.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
So we don't have a proposed amendment.
Well, I am going to
we will,
propose
but
an amendment, but it's just going to be to
Yeah.
bring this back.
let's
Oh, you want to just bring it up?
keep going.
So line 204.
And some of these, Vice Chair Carey, are these Are these similar? So I'm looking at 204, it's talking about the school and, or the school community again. So is this a similar concern as the other line, or is there?
Well, this is different than what I was reading in the second draft. And so school community wasn't referenced there.
Mhm.
But my question here is informed on school safety measures implemented. And again, I can only reference my experience, but whenever I asked about school safety measures as a parent, I was always told we can't discuss those because we want to preserve the efficacy of the preventative measures. Does that make sense? They couldn't tell me what the school was doing to protect the kids because by disclosing that, we wouldn't be protecting the kids.
Right, please.
And so my question is where's the balance there?
I have heard that before from parents, and I think the conversation we have with LEAs is, you can't get into maybe specific situations or scenarios, but speaking to the school community, parents, letting them know that, hey, this is the measures. So for example, hey, this school has threat assessment. We conduct threat assessment when a threat is made. We have drills that we conduct. So speaking to the school safety measures that the school employs or has is critical to me. Just saying you can't talk about it, that's not a good answer, because even parents, everyone is so critical even to reunification. People need to be aware of what's expected of them during a situation. Now, we don't need to get into police tactics and train on that, but we need to explain what school safety measures the school does have.
Well, quite frankly, you wouldn't be expected to say if a lockdown drill, for example, you wouldn't say this is where the students will gather in the classroom.
Yeah.
Right. And things change and students are in halls. You can't give that level of details that sometimes parents want to know for their students.
Yeah. And I do want to, the intent behind community was to speak to individuals.
Mhm.
So that was the intent behind the word community, is individuals. And just a reminder, even in Utah, a large portion of our students in a secondary education setting, a large percentage each class period will go to a release time building that campuses are still close together, where there could still be a threat. There could still be dangerous situations that happen. So I think to speak to the advantage of all individuals, I mean, the school and making sure that collaboration takes place, I think is important.
Okay. Vice Chair Carey.
Yeah, and just the last area, this part about firearms, line 205. Do we have any evidence or feedback on how our comprehensive violence prevention and intervention strategies, which have been incorporated into a school's regular curriculum, the results that has yielded? Do we have any data on that?
So the AG's office, they have a gun prevention program that's available to schools.
I'm sorry, I'm specifically referring to lines 205 through 209 now.
Are you talking about the firearm safety?
No, that's
specifically?
210.
Okay.
This is lines, it's up on the screen, line 205 through 209.
So you're wanting to know if what the data on the prevention strategies or intervention strategies, if we have that data, is that what you're?
Right, I mean, we're teaching this respect for diversity of other cultures as part of our violence prevention. We're teaching anger management. Do we have any data to show how effective they have been at reducing violence in our schools?
I think we would need to know exactly which of those interventions. So, and look at those programs and look at that data. Just generally speaking, I would need to know, specifically the resources that we're wanting data on to see the effectiveness of it.
The data I would want would be on resource lessons and materials on anger management. I would want the data on conflict resolution, and I would want the data on respect for diversity in other cultures and how each one of those provisions has reduced violence in our schools.
So I think that'd be a great question, but I also think it would be advantageous to reach out to the schools and ask them what they are doing for those. And if they do have success on those, it's not something that we have necessarily, so this is guidance, but LEAs have that local control to determine how they're going to go about in teaching that. And so I think we would be looking at different ways that schools could teach anger management. And we would, I think that would be, to my knowledge, that's not data that we collect.
Ben, Director Rasmussen, can I ask you, do we have any data as the USBE? I mean, we're requiring schools to do this, right? Shall provide. So it's my understanding, we're telling the schools, you have to provide resource lessons and materials on anger management. You have to provide conflict resolution. You have to provide respect for diversity and other cultures as a way to reduce violence in our schools. If we're requiring our LEAs to spend their time, their resources, are we collecting data on those requirements which we have imposed on those LEAs in that regard?
Doesn't sound like we're doing that at this point.
Are we willing to put that burden on LEAs to say, oh, one more reporting thing we need from you?
Well,
Just to add that to the list of 95 things.
it just strikes me as unusual that we would say, do all these things. We don't know if they're efficacious or not, but continue doing them. And we're not going to collect any data because we don't know if it's efficacious or not. So, and again, I know that's not your purview, but it just.
I'd be interested to see. I'm thinking of my own work life. I wouldn't even know what data to collect, quite frankly.
You can use the climate.
Yeah, you could use the climate survey. Yeah, there's, yeah, please.
If I may respond, while we do not collect data, as Rhett said, on local practices, the two data points that we do have that could potentially be triangulated, if you wanted to look at some of these, are the school climate data, which is perceptional data, and then we also have the discipline data. You could look at that as well. It is statewide data, so it's not broken down locally, again, because that's at the purview and to be used by local level. But we do have statewide data that is accessible on the data gateway, both the school climate, and then I can give everyone access. You all have access to the discipline report.
That's perfect. Those are great indicators. Can we move to Member Wood for a minute?
I just have, do you want me to make my motion now or just wait until after?
Let's hear, I'm curious to what Member Wood's question is. I thought we had asked every question possible on this, so I'm curious to know what Member Wood has to ask. Please, Member Wood.
Well, the question I originally had is probably long gone now, sorry. But I do wonder when we talk about the threat of, based on Member Carey's comments, the evidence-based threat assessment. As I recall, you said evidence-based threat assessment, there is only one that is evidence-based at this time. So when we refer to it in the 3 areas of this code, are we requiring our LEAs to use this very specific one? Is there a reason? Is it purposeful that we don't define the one evidence-based one there is? Are we saying that, well, maybe other evidence-based ones will come about, so we're going to give you that flexibility? And would it be appropriate at this time to move to add school or student to align with 100, the 100 rule school threat assessment in the 3 areas of the code? Would that be an appropriate motion?
Let's get a response from Ben, and then we'll move to motions. I do think it's appropriate, but we'll move to that after a response.
So the reason we don't call out CSTAG particular is we generally don't promote particular private programs that aren't created by USBE and rule. So that's the first reason. The second reason as you mentioned, if another program comes about, we don't want it to be restrictive so that wouldn't be an option. So those are the 2 reasons to allow flexibility, but also is to not promote something that's not board created in rule.
Okay, thank you. So Vice Chair Carey had a motion first, I believe, and then we'll move to Member Wood if additional amendments need to be made. Vice Chair Carey.
If I may, Chair, just have a question for Director Rasmussen.
Sure.
Director Rasmussen, I would like to make a motion to carry this to next month's committee hearing, but I want to know your thoughts on, does that in any way jeopardize USBE's ability to improve the safety of our students if we do that?
So with the recent passage of legislation, there are some requirements that, again, are not reflective in here. So for example, we have to go into an agreement, into contract with the vendor by June 15th. I do think if we move this to to May, and then full board in June, and then 30-day or 90-day public comment, we're getting into the next school year where schools now have to have school safety specialists. They have to be implementing threat assessment and update standard response protocol. There's several who have already reached out, do we need to get moving on this? And it's the process of, we got to take this through board. And so I think to help support LEAs and allow us to get enough so we can support them, I think it would be advantageous if we can to move this forward. But that's up to the board. That's up to the committee.
Vice Chair Carey, does that change your amendment? Do we want to move to Member Wood?
You can go to Member Wood. I need just to think for a second.
Sure. Member Wood.
So my actual motion would just to be to add student in front of the words threat assessment. I guess let me go back to the lines. But if that's a better motion that's written there, that you just define threat and assessment as student threat assessment, I will yield to staff to make the better motion.
I was just starting to draft a motion in anticipation of yours, but I do think that as we've talked about it, changing it to student threat assessment does narrow the scope of threat assessment a little bit. And so we could certainly add a definition that's consistent with that, but that would encompass all types of threat assessments and not just those that are coming from individual students.
If I can speak to Member Wood, I'd like to look through the document, Rhett. When I say I mean you. Look through the document and see where appropriate student would fit in. Because again, I don't want to tell LEAs you are responsible for things you're not responsible for within the rules. So if we can get staff to look through this and say, yes, student threat assessment is appropriate here, whatever threat assessment is appropriate here, and then define it. Now, I don't know if that's just a directive and then it comes before the board and then we check again. You know what I mean? I don't know if that's an amendment or directive. Sorry, you just got dropped, Ben. Member Lear, go ahead.
I'm just saying, I would be comfortable. I would be comfortable with that kind of a directive to say, do this. And then as it comes to the board, I would feel comfortable having it in their very capable hands, and then it's fixed when it gets to the board.
Okay.
So we can move along.
I would propose that we go the directive route if that's appropriate, but I would like it to come back before our committee, before it goes to the full board, so we can make a recommendation, as I believe is our responsibility. So, because in addition to the threat assessment, which I think is the key element, we also have that issue with guardian and parent. And again, if we can just change that, that's great.
So let's get a motion on the floor, Vice Chair Carey, and you can put whatever motion you want there. We'll vote on it, and then
Well, I have a motion on the floor. I have a motion.
You do have a motion on the floor, yes.
Then I would like to make a motion to amend that motion.
Okay, I think what you're asking would be more of a substitute motion, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, substitute motion.
Okay. Let's hear it.
The substitute motion would be that we ask that this matter be revised based on the issues that we've discussed here, and then represented to this committee prior to the next scheduled board meeting, so that we can fulfill our duty to make a recommendation to the full board.
Will you just keep an eye up there and help Ben make sure that your motion is what you're.
So I stopped typing because how do you want us to present it to the committee before the next scheduled board meeting, unless there's another committee meeting?
Can't they just? Can you email it and then we can email you any?
But the committee wouldn't be able to take action on the changes to make a motion to the board, or you just,
it's about changes. I think it's about just,
okay.
because it's close and
Well,
I
we-
think it's close enough that,
Can you speak in a microphone so Member Wood can hear you?
yes, I think it's close enough that we don't need to impede the progress, but it would save time if adjustments were made prior to the board meeting where any changes would possibly hold it up there, is just what is that what you're thinking would be the advantage to forwarding it, but still asking for changes?
Yes.
So you're gonna ultimately pass it out, but you're asking us to make some revisions before it goes to the board.
And,
In order to not slow up the timeline.
right. Oh my.
Your light's on, Member Lear. Go ahead.
And I trust you to do that. I trust you to do what we've suggested you do, and I don't need to see it again. So I think we can just proceed to vote on what we're directing you to do and then wait for the product that comes out for the board meeting. Would be my comfort level, but that may not be Member Carey's. So
So
we'd have to
Yeah.
vote to see
The-
if that's.
the substitute motion
Consensus.
that's on the floor, Vice Chair Carey, will you make sure that this, because I think this is what Carol's saying, this is what Molly is saying at the same time. And I think we're all on at least a similar page here, but I want to make sure that
Yep.
we move forward here and
And
Get
I
this
think
right.
that language is fine, but specifically what I'm looking for is that as Member Wood and Chair Hymas indicated that we substitute student where appropriate, student
Mhm.
threat assessment. If there are areas where student threat assessment wouldn't be appropriate, that we define threat assessment.
and you have these notes. Sorry, guys. I'm sure you do. I just want to make sure that we're all understanding. So those two areas there.
And then the last one would be the language school campus community. If we keep that language in, let's define what that means, or we find a better way to, not better, but perhaps clearer, yeah, way to define that.
Member Hart.
So I'd like to ask if, I mean, it seems like all it is it's not changing, it is some changes, but it's more clarity than it is anything else. Do you feel like those are things that you could do with not a lot of,
We can get those out to the committee next
can you?
week.
Okay, I just want to
I
make
don't-
sure it doesn't
Assuming-
require,
assuming you're-
that it's kind of clear what we're wondering. Okay.
I don't send it to me. I need one more thing to read. And I trust you.
Any additional discussion to that motion?
One more point
Member
about the
Lear.
school campus community, although we beat this to death. I think I want to make sure our intent is the same on the committee. I'm thinking that what we want to make sure is that the administration, the school are responsible for students on campus. So
Yeah.
it could even say the school community while on campus, or so it's just a matter where you put the preposition. Okay, that's what my intent was, because so it does not school kids that are at the Conoco or the Top Stop or whatever. Yes, or
I
rings.
do think though, that I do have a concern. I know we're not trying to run
Really
this
bad.
out. But a school community, I mean, we have the Safe Utah app that when the threats come in that from a student that says, I'm bringing a gun to school, that's going to affect the school community. So don't narrow it to such a point that we're not valuable. I actually really love the word community because I feel that is everything.
It does work, but with the Safe UT and there's a threat to bring it on campus, correct me if I'm wrong, staff, but I think to Member Lear's point, if a student gets in a fight at Lagoon, they're not going to call the school, right? They're going to take care of that.
Unless it's school Lagoon Day.
So how do they?
Bad
so
example.
In my district, we had a knifing incident across the street that it was at lunchtime. It was in the park across the street from a local high school. That was still the school community. Their students had gone over to watch this happen. It was during the lunch day. It's across the street. How do you define that? You know, they were still in the community. They were.
And we're really beating this up, but I just have to add, that's a perfect hypothetical for one of the classes I've taught for 20 years with teachers training to be administrators. Are you responsible for that knife fight across the street? And yeah, but then what's the nexus? Is it that you've got
We're getting
300
into it.
kids gathering around, or do you have 3? Anyway, my point being, Leanne, that's a tough one because there were some administrators who really do believe that it's their job to go and stop those fights 2 blocks away. Is 1 block enough? Too many? What about across the street? So that's why as sort of limited as it, I'm not wanting to extend school responsibility to other places that beyond the school property. Or where the students are at an activity that's school sponsored.
And that, I appreciate that. I agree. I think we're getting into a lot of what ifs here, and different scenarios. I think the rule as it is written is pretty strong. I think that these amendments can be helpful with clarity and at least provide LEAs with direction. So, Member Vice Chair Carey.
I would just add to this, we talked about substituting student threat assessment, and I don't see that in the substitute motion.
That's what I meant by saying including defining.
Yeah.
But what I don't want to see is, I don't want to see us now using threat assessment interchangeably with student threat assessment.
Right.
Well, I think the problem there is that doesn't the statute require a threat assessment, not a student threat assessment? That's why we've used this particular term. So, I mean, if you we're trying to stay consistent with the underlying statute by using the term threat assessment. And so that's why I think it might be easier to just define threat assessment consistent with what we've used as student threat assessment and other rules. But I mean, if you want to go student threat assessment and narrow the scope, which isn't necessarily in line with the statute, I mean, we'll follow the board's lead there.
Can we say consistent with defining threat assessment consistent with the definition of student threat assessment? Would that put us more in line with
That was the intent, but I can,
Okay.
we can make this as specific as you want.
Well, until we hit 500 words, I really.
Okay, so the motion on the floor is that the committee directs staff to revise the rule based on the committee discussion and presented to Law and Licensing committee members prior to the next scheduled board meeting, including defining threat assessment consistent with the definition of student threat assessment in R277-100, replacing the term guardian and addressing the school community language. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? We're good. That passes unanimously.
You need the underlying motion though, too,
Okay,
for the board.
so the motion, well, I'm gonna put a motion forward here. The motion is that the committee approves R277. No, help me out here, Ben.
So that tells us to make amendments, but if you want to have a motion for the board to address at its next meeting, that would
Then
be
we
the
do
motion.
need to, okay. So do I?
You could say draft 3 with
the
pending
staff
amendments.
directive or-
Yeah.
Okay, proposed, okay. So, I move that the committee approves R277-400, draft 3 with proposed amendments on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All those in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes. Thank you both. Wonderful job.
Don't move too fast.
That's right. Okay. Agenda item 3.8, R277-403, School Safety Pilot Program. Again, we have Rhett to cue us up here.
Well, and I can just lead up here.
Oh,
This is being essentially absorbed by the rule that you just adopted amendments for. Recommendation is to repeal this rule. This pilot program is no longer in place. And so these issues would be addressed by the main school safety rule 400.
Seeking a motion.
Make a motion.
Member Lear.
I move that the committee repeal R277-403 on first reading, recommend the board repeal the rule on second time.
Thank you. The motion before the committee is that the committee repeal R277-403 on first reading and recommend the board repeal the rule on second and final reading. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. That passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next agenda item 3.9, R277-622, School-Based Mental Health Qualifying Grant Program. We have Ben Rasmussen to cue us up.
So this is coming about as a result of HB 411. It provided funding as part of this grant for school-based LEA behavioral health support personnel. So the amendments in this rule would do two things. There's one small provision that I'll just highlight, that it updates consistent with the statute to say that the LEAs can use grant funds to pay for salary and benefits for these personnel. That's on lines 121. And then we added some definitions as to what that might mean, specifically what behavioral health support personnel means and what kind of training they are required to receive from their LEAs. That's in the definition section starting on line 22. I think the staff that are here to ask their questions on that are Tiana McCall and Ashley Lower. I think they are probably on Zoom if you have questions about the particular rule.
Committee members, any questions? Member Lear?
I can ask a question, just, I don't know if you'd be the best, Ben, or I understand this rule is only consistent with what the legislature has told us to do in the last bill. So we're not expanding our scope of mental health, we're just providing this pilot program.
Well, it's expanding the program and allowing to pay for the salaries of these individuals.
Right, but per the funding we received and the directives from the legislature. So we're not saying anything goes, or I'm exaggerating for effect, but it's just because we've been told to create a pilot program, making clear. Sure.
Yes.
Right.
Okay, seeing no other questions,
Do you
I'd
want me
be
to make a
seeking a
motion?
motion. Yes, please, Member Lear.
And how fast can you put it up there?
Yeah.
Perfect. I move that the committee approves R277-622 draft 1 on first reading, forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Lear. The motion before the committee is that the committee approves R277-622 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that passes unanimously. Thank you.
Go to 623. Go to some of the other shorter ones.
I know.
We've got till 12:30, don't we?
We do have till 12:30.
We have a lot of items.
There's a few items that are,
Of sticky wiki.
you know
nature.
what? I don't know which one's gonna be shorter, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Let's go on 623 and then Ben, like I said, clear your throat in about 2 minutes.
Okay.
Agenda item 3.10, 310, R277-623 School Climate Survey. This is an amendment, and Director Rasmussen, Ben, will cue us up here.
Yeah, so this isn't as a result of any legislation necessarily, but staff has received some different questions ongoing about the administration of the school climate survey. This is actually something that's in process right now and happens every other year. So they are getting questions on certain things that we wanted to clarify in the rule. So there's just a couple of changes there. You'll see on line 40 through 42, just clarifying that because we are required to provide data to the legislature on this, we need the specific questions in the model survey used. In addition, so we wanted to clarify that to make that clarification on line 40 through 42, clarified that the superintendent establishes the time frame for administering the survey on 46. And then on line 66 through 68, just clarifies that the superintendent has the right to pull that data from Qualtrics after the survey is complete. Chantel Cota is here to answer your questions. I believe Willie Chen, is she online as well, or just you today? Aaron Bruff is here too, so we've got lots of people that can answer your questions.
So before we go to member Lear,
Oh, I didn't need
Oh.
to have.
okay, it's just me then. I do want to just kind of bring up some of the conversation that I had in a meeting previous to this committee meeting here. First off, the school climate survey cycle, how often is that? Chantel, please.
Yes, Chantel Cota, Coordinator, Safe and Healthy Schools. So it's administered every other, in odd years, so every 2 years.
Okay, so, and we are neck deep in this year, right? And so
Correct.
these changes that are before us, I guess, what does that do overall? It's just like Ben says, just bringing us up to law. Is that right?
We're trying to clarify some questions that they've received from LEAs so that it's clear in rule backing up the guidance that they're giving
Yeah.
the LEAs.
The concern that was brought to my attention was that law, there's a couple things, and I'll just shout them out. I don't know if they mean anything to anybody. 53G 8-802, and then 53E 9203. There was some confusion on, so one of them says that the LEA shall administer, but that they may use the survey that the SEA designates, right? And so some of our LEAs don't want to use some of the questions that are in there, and that goes to 53E 9203, and that was kind of, I talked to Katie this morning about that a little bit, some privacy questions. One of the questions that was brought up being, are you male, female, or prefer not to answer? And we're going to get these, they seem to keep coming back, right? And so we just want to make sure that we as an agency are aligned, and so that it's clear to LEAs what's expected of them. And so that's a discussion, Chantel, and I don't know how much time we want to spend on this. I've been assured that because of the cycle that we're in right now, even if we did want to make changes to rule or even law, it wouldn't happen this year anyway. So we do have a little bit of time on this, and I don't know how much discussion we want to spend on this, but that was some of the thoughts and concerns that I had as one committee member.
So I was just going to point out, I think that our Assistant AG, Ashley Beal, is online and is prepared to address whether the questions in the survey are an issue as far as the Student Data Privacy Act are concerned. With regard to your other question on 802, the statute that the legislature passed really is kind of contradictory, because it tells us we can make it discretionary for LEAs, but it also tells the board you have to get this data and you have to report it back to us. So if which questions the LEAs use is discretionary, then the board isn't able to give the legislature reliable data, and that's why we've made the discretionary part that they can ask additional questions, but we still need the specific data that the legislature has asked for. And so that's why we are asking the board to include this provision that they need to ask all those questions. But Ashley is online to address the questions on the Student Data Privacy Act.
Well, with that, the rule can say one thing, the law can say another. I had this conversation about another rule that was put before, then an LEA got a letter of non-compliance because they followed the rule and not the law, right? So I know that was a setup. I'm sorry. You see what I'm saying, though, right? We need some clarity, and I don't know if this rule at this point offers that. But again, I see what we're attempting to do, but to say, well, the rule says this, but this is the law, but rule trumps law. It doesn't, right? I know, I set you up there again. Okay, good.
But we do feel that the discretion we're allowing under the rule is consistent with the statute. But you are correct. The statute, if there's a conflict, would always trump the rule.
So we need to, and that's the thing is, the fact that the argument is happening means that there's some clarity that needs to take place. And again, we're not seeking for that necessarily right now. But I think moving forward, maybe we talk to some legislatures and see
Well,
what that is. Remember, Lear, go ahead.
I think if it wasn't drafted carefully enough, that's not our problem. We should do the best we can, and I think Ben described their interpretation of doing the best we can. And then if the legislature wants something else, it's the legislature's job to clean up the language next year.
Right.
And if they want us to not give them the best data we have, then they can sunset our rule, as we've experienced before. So I think the board and board staff are doing all the right things. And I'm not, given the fact that this statute is not perfect, and I'm not wanting to take responsibility for that. So I think that drafting it this way is as good as we can do, unless until the legislature revises it next year. I don't want to go to legislators and see what their intent is, because there's 250 of them, and the intent is of the body that passes not the intent of 2 or 3 legislators, even if it's the sponsors of the bill.
Okay, we have a hand
But-
from
But I
AAG
think
Beal.
Ashley, yeah.
Yep, and then Chantel, you have a comment as well. Okay.
Yes, I'll
Ashley,
try
go
to keep it brief and give you guys kind of the 20,000 foot view here, but I don't think that the statute and the board rule directly conflict. I think the board rule is just a little bit more specific than the statute. The statute requires USBE to create the model policy and then require an LEA to create or adopt and disseminate a school climate survey. And then the rule requires schools to disseminate, as required by law, a school climate survey, and then the rule says containing the questions identified in the model survey. So it's a little bit more specific and tailored to that, but I don't think that they actually conflict. And then with regard, just briefly, Chair Hymas, to your question about the biological sex identifier question. I spoke with Aaron Bra yesterday, and USBE did, put together a document last fall that designated, that biological sex and gender are 2 different things, and biological sex is just the physical condition of being male or female, designated by genetics and anatomy at birth. And so it doesn't fall under that 53E9203 category of sexual behavior, orientation, or attitudes. So it doesn't fall in that category.
Thank you. Chantel?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify a few things. So just going back to the school climate survey, R2776234 does state that the LEA shall administer the school climate survey containing the questions. That's where we get that unified data, right? That we can look at as a state and say, okay, how are things going as a state? What type of technical assistance and support can we offer, right? As one of the primary roles. Where local agency comes in is being able to add those questions onto that survey, right? Are the questions that we have crafted perfect? No. Is there room to look at those questions moving forward and say, hey, let's look at the data that we've got from this year. So if we look at it, this is the second iteration, if you will, with the first iteration being a pilot, right? So that was kind of the push out, roll out. Now we're in our formal first phase of it, right? And so if we look at it from that lens and say, let's look at the data, and then let's ask those questions around, is this the data we're seeking? Is this data helping schools? Because ultimately the data is to help schools to improve their environment, right? And to create policies and procedures in their school locally. So to help them and to be partners at USBE, my role as a coordinator is to be able to look at statewide data as well and say, hey, here's some support and here's some assistance. I had the opportunity to meet with the student service directors in St. George a couple weeks ago, and we had some really interesting conversations around just kind of a unified want to partner, with the LEAs and USBE to create that technical assistance, and also to be able to have the opportunity to ask those questions. So that's really kind of the spirit of where this came. And then I understand legally, we probably want to clean up some of that language so that we can better support and technically support our schools. But wanted to just ensure that, I think we're all on the same page that, when looking at school climate, we want to make sure that we're asking those right questions. And just speaking to what you said, Chair Hymas, we have some time to do that. And I think that that's important to consider as we're thinking about amendments to this current rule that we have.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Vice Chair Carey?
Yeah, just on line 66 and 67, it says the superintendent will share the data through the board approved online provider. And it's like we're treating the board approved online provider as a pass through. Are we providing it to that board, or are we just passing it to that board so they can provide it to other entities?
The LEA is providing that to the superintendent through the provider. So that's how we're going to retrieve the data, is by using Qualtrics, our online provider. There was a concern there about a couple LEAs sharing.
Yep, I see that now. And my question is, do we ever provide a stripped down, privacy protected version of this data with the parents?
I can answer that. So this is Aaron Bruff from Data and Statistics. It is available online. Go in the data gateway. There's a link there. It's all open. You can't drill down to school or to LEA level or school level, but it's the state level information is all there available.
Can I ask a follow up? Why don't we provide? I can see the benefits and risks from providing even a stripped down, privacy protected version to parents, but if we're talking about safety of students, wouldn't this be the kind of data we would want parents to be aware of, not at a statewide level where it has less meaning, but at that school level where it might have more impact?
Sorry, either one. Want to go?
I can start with probably more of a content specific, but LEAs are able to share this. And in fact, many have a practice of sharing it with their school community councils. And so that is where the parent and the school administrator LEAs can really partner on this data. So that's from the content perspective, but I'll let Aaron discuss any technical perspectives.
I was just meeting with a school and they don't share the data. So some schools do and some schools don't. It's on each school. Is there a reason why, if we can provide that, is there a reason why we don't include a provision that schools be required to make this data available at the school level?
We have tried, but there are many people that think that it shouldn't be part of a dashboard. And so those efforts kind of have been restricted. There's also an issue with end size in a lot of schools. They're too few, and then the privacy issues are. But it was, and I could be wrong, maybe Member Lyra can help me. It was one of the recommendations of the accountability redesign to be part of a dashboard. And I believe it was a recommendation, and those recommendations were not adopted by the legislature.
That the committee of practitioners recommended it, but the legislature did not.
But certainly well, this goes back to the discussion Ben and Matt were having. We could certainly develop a rule that would say we want this to be provided with those safeguards, meaning if the end size isn't big enough and privacy would be at risk, then they would be excluded from that. Is that correct?
If you like, again, Aaron Bruff from Data and Statistics, yes, obviously these can be done. When we say it's interesting because what we're dealing with is survey data. And so now we're in the realms of inferential statistics, not descriptive statistics. So end size is an interesting thing that we would be playing with here, because we're not identifying an individual per se, because the way the survey is set up, it goes out and then it is anonymous response. Now an LEA could adopt, change, modify, and try to push it out in a different manner to identify the student. So that I'm just saying is, can it be done? Absolutely. Are we also in the process of helping develop better practices and shared resources throughout all the LEAs, especially in the utilization of this tool? Yes, that is happening as well. So, I mean, if desired to put it in rule that you will share, okay, but then we'd have to implement a couple things, and it just would be some technical help to make sure that as it was being shared, that yes, privacy concerns were put in place, and also that we're applying correct inferential statistics to it, not just strictly descriptive, if that makes sense.
It does, and I'm not going to make a motion at this time. I'd like to talk to you offline perhaps and get more insight into it. But it's interesting because I just met with a group of health and social workers up in the Ogden area who would love to have more access to some of this data and they just can't get it. And then it comes up today. But again, I'd like to talk through it before then. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I don't see any additional questions, so I'd be seeking a motion.
That motion.
Please, Member Lear.
Oops. And here's my cheat sheet
Sorry,
is there.
I pulled them away.
I move that the committee approves R277-623 draft 1 on first reading, forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Lear. The motion before the committee is that the committee approves R277-623 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that passes unanimously. We have about 25 minutes left. Let me just, thank you, Chantel and Aaron, thank you. Let me just tell you what we're looking at here. We believe that this next agenda item and board policy 4002 will go fairly quickly. We believe that there might be some questions with US EAP, and we have a committee member online to answer those questions. So I'd like to go to our next agenda item and then jump board policy quickly and then go to US EAP, and we may end up using the remainder of the time there.
At the end.
Yes, so
Okay.
The agenda item 3.11, R277-625 mental health screeners, we have Ben here to queue us up.
So there's only one really big substantive change in this rule. There's one big substantive change in this rule. You'll see that just kind of, there's some language stricken on from 70 to through 77. And then there's language added just clarifying that an LEA governing board participating in this particular program needs to notify the superintendent if they're going to be participating, and the superintendent provides a form. This was mandated by HB 403. We have updated a little bit of terminology, but nothing major substantive from my recollection throughout the rule. But that's essentially what it's doing, is just adding a provision. The LEA governing boards need to notify staff if they're going to participate in this mental health screeners program. Tiana McCall, I believe, is online if you have questions.
Thank you, Member Lear.
Well, to be exact, it says, as I'm reading it, it says we have to notify the superintendent either way.
Yes, you're correct. If they're
Okay.
going to be participating or non.
Or non-participating.
Thank you for
Right.
that correction.
So I'm prepared to make a motion if, and nobody has questions.
I'm prepared to
Never
hear a
mind.
motion.
Looks like Molly had questions. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm ready. I move that the committee approves R277-625 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Lear. The motion before the committee is that the committee approves R277-625 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that passes unanimously. As mentioned, we're going to briefly jump over 3.112 or 12 and move to agenda item 3.13, Board Policy 4002, Advisory Council for the Utah Schools for the Deaf and the Blind. And Ben Rasmussen is here to start us off.
As Chair Hymas mentioned, this is the USDB Advisory Council. We got direction to make an amendment to propose that would allow one non-voting member from the board to serve on the council appointed by the board chair. So the sole change is what you see on the screen. It clarifies that there are 11 voting members. There's also a non-voting member from the board if this policy change is adopted.
Somebody wants to do it.
Thank you, Ben. Member Wood, I don't know if you want to speak to this. I think it's a great idea and probably long overdue. One question I did have for staff, we were kind of waiting on Chair Moss to see if we were going to have two. Did we hear back on that?
I emailed him. He never responded, so I don't have a response on that. We could certainly amend it at full board if there's a need to do that pretty simply. But at this point, my understanding is it's just one.
Member Wood, brief thoughts?
I know that he said he would be attending. He didn't attend last month, but so that was my only concern when we moved forward. But this is a great change. It was amazing opportunity to sit and listen to these parents that are dealing with our students with the disabilities and understand and as the local school board, it surprised me. There were concerns that they brought up that I'm like, wait a minute, if we're the local school board, why don't we know more about this? So I think this will create a better connection to the USDB and the board. And I'd love to make a motion when it comes.
Please, any other questions? No? Member Wood, please.
Okay, I move that the committee approve board policy 4002 draft 1 and forward a recommendation to the board for approval.
Thank you, Member Wood. The motion before the committee is that the committee approve board policy 4002 draft 1 and forward a recommendation to the board for approval. All in favor say aye.
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 Aye, that passes unanimously. Thank you. Let's jump back to agenda item 3.12. This is the USEEP recommendations on best practices for the recruitment and retention of special education para-educators. We do have Dr. Voorhees who is going to cue this up for us, I believe, and we also have co-chair Michelle Beck online for any questions as well. So Dr. Voorhees, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee. Leah Voorhees, Assistant Superintendent of Student Support. I am your liaison to the Utah Special Education Advisory Panel. The advisory panel meets generally 4 times a year. And then has a pre-meeting every year to look at all special education data, of which you know we have a lot in Utah, and determine priorities for consideration during the year. This year, they determined 3 priorities, and they spent 2 full meetings discussing this priority, which is related to shortages of special education providers in our state. So we looked at the data that we did have available. We heard from several LEA special education directors, large, small LEA and charter school directors, talking about recruitment, retention, barriers, successes. And we also heard from a couple HR directors in LEAs. The special ed directors brought, 2 of them brought their HR directors with them. So the panel discussed both licensed providers and paraeducator providers of special education services. And as a result, had 2 recommendations to present to you today. And let me back up and tell you the reason that they chose to provide a recommendation about paraeducators as opposed to the educators, because to the licensed staff, because they reviewed data and had conversation about both, is they had a long discussion about the alternate pathway to educator licensing for special education that we are administering here out of our office. And we currently have 300 candidates in the pipeline. Some of them are working on the application, some of them are fully enrolled in the program, and we do have 1 graduate of the AppleSped program. And so after reviewing that data, they decided to focus on paraeducators. So they have 2 recommendations for you today. You can see those recommendations in bold. The first one, that the State Board of Education develop a list of best practices for LEAs to help recruit and retain paraeducators. The reason they're putting forward this recommendation is because they heard a lot of different practices across the state, and some of which seem to be working. Providing paraeducators full-time work with benefits seems to make a difference. Yes. Having paraeducators come from the community, like growing paraeducators from the school community, seems to be a strategy that makes a difference. So they recommended that as the first recommendation. The second recommendation is that the USBE require LEAs to submit an annual supply and demand survey report so that we would have data. Very specific data, as opposed to what we currently have, which is anecdotal data about the number of openings and the amount of time that it takes to fill an opening for both licensed and and paraeducator staff for special education. And that's a basic overview, Chair, of the recommendation.
Thank you so much. I just want to take a second and thank you and thank the USEEP. I know we have co-chair Beck here with us. We appreciate your work and what you guys do here. Before I move into my own thoughts and perhaps amendments or discussion, let's first hear from Member Wood.
Two quick questions. One is, are there education requirements for paraeducators? Like, are there expectations that come in?
Dr. Voorhees.
Thank you, Member Wood. No, there are not. So in title, in order to use Title I funds, there are. In special education, there are not. However, there are requirements that paraeducators that are providing specially designed instruction are trained and supervised by licensed providers. And that's actually in the IDEA. That's in the Code of Federal Regulations.
Okay, thank you. And the second question, in the recommendation, the number 2 recommendation, and I don't know if any chair or Vice Chair Hart, if any of you have been involved, but we've had that committee going on since way before me on the requirements and reports. So we're trying to reduce that. Could anyone answer to me how this would impact that? Is this something that we might be better to refer to that committee to look at? It just says like it kind of conflicts with what we've been trying to do, although I see the need.
Can I speak to that just really quickly? This is one of the thoughts that I had as well. And it's probably a recommendation that it is a recommendation that I will bring before the committee today. Is I struggle as well to require LEAs to do something like this. In a conversation, it was advised or given that we maybe send out a survey to LEAs, inviting them to fill out the survey, which I think most, if not all, will. I think it's important. But anytime I see require LEA, I get a little uneasy. So those are just some of my thoughts. If there's additional answers to her comments, that's great as well. Does that help, Member Wood? If so, we'll move to Member Lear for a question.
Yes, those were my two comments. Thank you.
Okay, Member Lear.
And if I can, I'll just go to that same one once, and then I have a completely different issue question. But I just was whispering to Molly for a minute. These are USEEP's recommendations. So it's not I don't see it as our role to tell them, no, you've got to have a different recommendation. I'll leave that to the Administrative Rules Committee as an aside. But I think that we receive these and then the board acts on it or not as it wants to. So I hope everybody's comfortable with that. And then my main question was, remind me who is on that USEEP committee, because is it in there and I didn't see it?
It's on another. Chair.
Please.
So you have a policy, Board Policy 1005 is about USEEP, but your policy is actually taken from the Code of Federal Regulations, because it is required that every state and territory have a special education advisory panel. So 51% of the members have to be individuals with disabilities or parents of individuals with disabilities. And then state agencies who serve students with disabilities participate. So we have representatives from Juvenile Justice Services, DCFS, the Division of Services for People with Disabilities. We have a representative from the Disability Law Center. We have a representative from the Parent Center. It's also required that you have representative from Educator Preparation. So we do have, we had 2 professors, one just resigned, so we will be advertising for another educator preparation professor, and then individual who provides services to youth who are homeless, an individual who provides services to youth in private schools, and an individual who provides post-secondary transition services to youth.
How many people total?
So right now we have 24.
Okay.
Yeah, and 15 parents. And I am your liaison. I don't vote So
And I'm ready to make a motion if you want a motion.
Almost. I want to speak to the point that you brought up, because one of the recommendations here is that the committee directs staff to require LEAs to submit an annual supply and demand report. And so I want to ask Michelle respectfully, and I understand we just heard the numbers that are on this committee, and so you're one of them that I'm asking you to speak for all of them. I don't want to just vote this up or down, because I do like the idea of getting feedback so that we don't have to just go off of anecdotal data. So I don't know, and like you are one member, I'm one member as well, but I don't know if requiring LEAs is going to pass through. And so I'm trying to create a way that would be beneficial to all. Tell me your thoughts, and consequently the committee's thoughts on an optional survey to receive that data.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Hymas. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. As you observed, I'm one person. I'm a little hesitant to speak for everyone, but I understand what you're saying. And so I'll give my best. My understanding, personally, and of what the group was trying to say, is that it wanted to make sure that the board was aware of this problem and not, like you say, anecdotally, but with numbers. That said, this is me speaking, not the panel. I know from my day job, I understand the idea that you want to not add burdensome additional reports, and I understand how that may work within your another objective that the board has. And so I feel like I would much rather see you make that change to a survey than to have the risk that the whole thing gets voted down, because I can tell you that the panel had a lot of passion about really trying to push forward and getting more paraeducators because of their really immense role that they play in our special education students' education.
Thank you, Michelle. Member Lear, your light is on. Do you have an additional
No, I was just trying to
follow-up?
make a well, I was wondering what Michelle's role is. What is she?
Oh, I'm one of the parents. I have a
Okay.
child who has disabilities.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I have an amendment to the motion. Well, there's no, I guess we need to put a motion up there, but there's a,
Before you ask it, since we know what it's going to be, can I ask
please.
Dr. Voorhees-Leah if, do you feel like it still provides good data if it's an optional survey, or we're going to get skewed data that then is compromised?
I think the data would be better than what you have now. And I think it would still be worth it. I agree with Michelle.
Okay, thanks.
So I don't have an amendment. I just have a motion, right? There we go. So I move that the committee, there's two recommendations. Do we need to vote on them separately?
Looks like we had anticipated.
Let's do the first one, and then I'll put the second one out there and we can have further discussion. So for the first motion, I move that the committee direct staff to develop a list of best practices for LEAs to help recruit and retain paraeducators and forward to the board for approval. Any discussion to that motion? Light is on, sorry. Okay. Member Wood.
So we're asking that the list of best practices be forwarded to the board? I'm just clarifying for my.
Come here first though, right? Leah?
Yeah, well, would we see it first? Or would it?
Yes.
Yeah, do you want to speak to that? Sorry, Dr. Voorhees.
Yeah, so I'll tell you what we have done in the past. You can do whatever you want, obviously. But in the past, when you've directed me to do something related to a USEEP recommendation, I bring it back to committee. And then you don't need to take action on it unless you want to direct me to do something else. And then it ends up as an information item for full board. But it comes back to you as an information item to the committee.
Does that answer your question, Member Wood?
Yes.
Oh, I gotta keep looking. Okay. Seeing no other hands, let me repeat the motion here. The motion on the floor is that the committee direct staff to develop a list of best practices for LEAs to help recruit and retain paraeducators and forward to the board for approval. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. Okay, I am going to put forth another motion. I move that the committee direct staff to request LEAs complete an option, supply and demand survey.
Optional, sorry.
Optional, and we need to create that survey. Is that right? Or do you have that? Does this read, before we get into discussion, does this read my thoughts? Dr. Voorhees, can you tell me if this is what I want?
That was the original recommendation.
Yeah, so to take the original recommendation, I simply want to make it optional, not require LEAs. So it's the same, I think the USEEP, the panel or committee has done an excellent job. I just want to make it an optional rather than a requirement.
I think Ben, you could change the words, if I may, Chair, to instead of direct staff to request, direct staff to develop an optional survey to develop and forward or send to LEAs. Because then you include the creation part. Does that make sense, Chair?
Chair Hymas,
Yes, Member Wood.
question on this. So can we as a committee move forward things to LEAs, or does that have to come from the board?
It'll come, this go to the board.
It has to go to through the board. Our committee moves it to the board and then it's moved to LEAs.
So I would,
So
okay.
Is
there we
that-
go.
So let me put a motion on the floor, then let's discuss it. I move that the committee recommend that the board direct staff to develop and send to LEAs an optional supply and demand survey and special education teachers and on special education teachers and paraeducators. And forward to the board for approval? Or do I not need
Well, I
that?
think you've made that recommendation to
Okay.
the board, so.
Okay. Oh, there, yes,
that's
yes,
the
you're right.
first Part of it.
So that's the motion. Discussion to the motion. And I think we had Member Lear.
And my concern is, Matt, that this is a pretty prestigious and broad-ranging committee. I hate to take their recommendation and change it. So I don't care if you or even if the committee votes in favor of your motion, but I think we need to preserve the fact that this committee, USEEP committee, recommended something different than your motion. That's my reservation. I don't know how you say that other than, a parenthetical phrase, despite the fact that the committee recommended
Right.
that this be a required survey for LEAs. The committee recommends that the board, but I just think it's important, both in respect for the great people and work that they did, that we communicate to the board what the committee proposed.
And I have no problem with that, with saying, yeah, this is what USEEP recommended.
Okay.
The committee, or at least Member Hymas, is recommending,
The majority of the board.
right? I'm
committee.
just saying,
Okay.
I'll tell you right now, I won't vote for something that says required, but I'm just one person. That's why I'm
Sure.
bringing forth this amendment. But I do respect what you're saying
So
about
could
USEEP.
we revise it to say, to include the fact that, or maybe it's just another sentence that says.
We've already, can't we just include the these
The
are,
committee's recommendations will
Well-
be back up on the
well,
board
but,
agenda.
but we already, there's that page that exists of the 5 recommendations that came out of USEEP. Isn't this one of the 5 that we accepted their recommendations recently? And this is just one of them? Do you remember?
No, I think I know what you're talking about. That was,
That was a while ago.
yeah, a year and a half ago.
Oh, was it?
So this is new.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
but
different.
this was also their recommendation
But
then as
their-
well.
There wasn't a recommendation for a shortage, or for a supply and demand survey.
Oh,
But
okay.
there were recommendations related to recruitment and retention.
Okay,
Yes.
all right. I was just thinking we could include those because we had already accepted
And
them.
my only concern is that when we get into the board discussion and the board chair reads through these things, a lot of the backup gets lost in the shuffle. And I would like the motion to clarify that the committee went a different direction than UC. That's
Yeah.
that's my preference, because
I have
these are practitioners, and there's tension. I don't disagree.
Yeah, thank you, Member Lear. We'll go to Vice Chair Carey and then Member Wood.
Yeah, I think that it'd be fatal for my support for the motion, because we don't do that as a form of practice and process on every motion that we pass. We don't reference what the original committee had recommended, whether we agree with it or disagree with it. And I just think that if it were policy, if we were to say, hey, we're going to do that on every motion that we make, I can understand that. But to selectively pick and choose, I don't see the value in that, and I would be opposed to it.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carey. Member Wood.
Well, I'm going to make a motion. It can be voted down, but I move that the committee forwards the USEAP recommendation to the board with the recommendation that the board direct staff to develop and send to LEAs an optional supply and demand survey on special education teachers and paraeducators. So I'm amending to just add that we first forward the USEAP recommendations to the board so that they see the whole recommendation. I think this adds some, when we have these advisory committees, when we have multiple professionals working together, I think it's to our benefit to admire the work that they do and to respect that, but also to put forward the needs as we represent all of these LEAs and how we can help and support them without adding additional work to their load.
Thank you. Member Hart. Yeah, and keep an eye on the screen, Member Wood, and let us know if we need to adjust anything. We'll go to Member Hart right now, though.
I'm not opposed to collecting the data. I want to just say that right up front. However, I am concerned that, one, we may have some data on employment trends somewhere. I just feel like it's narrow, and I think we should look at it. So I'm concerned, I'm just thinking about it pragmatically. So a survey goes out. Is it going out to HR? Is it going out to special ed directors? I feel like it needs a little bit more refinement, and it may be that we need other data. It may be that it can be asked with other. I just feel like it's a narrow piece of a larger picture that I think we need to be very intentional when we're collecting data. I'm not ready to do this little thing. It sounds like it's a simple, probably 4-question survey, but collecting that kind of data on supply, demand, what is demand? What is supply? I mean, I can tell you right now, in 53 schools, I'm not sure we even know how many para positions we have open. And I mean, some of these teachers leave within 2 months of being hired. I feel like we're not yet there on fully developing what we need and how best to get it. I want to get it. I'm just not sure that we're there.
I know this is unconventional and we are out of time, but Michelle, can you speak to that? I'm hoping that your committee had conversation around what that would look like and these concerns.
Well, I don't know that our committee did have conversation about the difficulty of the data, because we heard from 2 or 3 districts who just came in and said, here's how many open positions we have now. and maybe how many positions they had open at the beginning of the school year. So we didn't hear feedback that there was difficulty gathering this data, but we heard a lot of feedback from the parents on the group talking about anecdotal evidence of IEPs not being followed, FAPE not being provided because there was an inadequate paraprofessional staff. So
Yeah.
sorry, I can't give you more than that.
No, and that's okay. And I guess a requirement would require some dates, I would guess, right? And to the point that was kind of made, it's like, it depends on, I mean, somebody could walk away at any given time. So if I'm requiring a survey, typically with a required survey or required testing or required anything, there's a set amount of time that has to be done by. And I don't know what kind of, right, what is the date that would be set that says, oh, well, most openings happen at this time. So is that the date that's set, right? And that's not, again, that's not even talking about the requirement issue that's there. So I do agree with Member Hart. There's some concerns that are there. And I don't know if this requires further discussion from the committee. I don't know if you can take this back to USEEP and say, hey, what does this look like? Or if that's something that our staff does. Dr. Voorhees, can you speak to this at all and offer some clarity?
Thanks, Chair. If you wanted me to look into it, which I would be happy to do, what I would start with is gather special ed directors and some HR directors and have the conversation and include Malia or the appropriate person from her staff to have the conversation about, we know what data we have, which is almost nothing. Like the data that we have is anecdotal. So then talk to special ed directors, a few HR directors, and facilitate a conversation about what data is it reasonable to provide, and when makes sense for actually acting on the data and doing something about it, right? So I think that the panel was thinking end of year, that school districts and charter schools would send that data at the end of the school year. My team would look at it and make recommendations about, okay, what support could we provide school districts and charter schools for the coming school year? But we didn't actually discuss in the meeting, to your point, timelines.
Yeah.
So that's how I would respond.
Again, I like the idea of a survey. I love what USEEP has done here and brought this to our attention. This is a great starting point. I don't know if it's strong enough yet to be a requirement. Like, as I mentioned before, I don't like requirements, but I shouldn't say that was unfair, but
And you like some requirements.
yes, I like to choose my requirements. I just don't know if a requirement at this point would be beneficial anyway, as we start to build and get better and better. So I don't know if you had
But I'm trying to figure out what you don't like about this motion of Leanne's. It's optional survey. The only difference is that we would make sure the board sees the recommendations from USEEP.
Okay.
Right.
Member Hart.
It's just these kinds of surveys come in pieces and parts, and it very rarely gives a complete picture. I'm biased. I would like it to be considered as an option for an audit, or an audit questionnaire that also asks about other related positions. I'm concerned about the number of speech therapists and some of the other positions. I just think that if we're going to ask our LEAs, they ran a bill to try to get us to not bother them. And so I would like to, when we're asking them data, making sure we're asking all the questions in one place and then doing it. I'm just not sure. I mean, yes, we can send out a survey and we can ask. I think we would get better information back. I mean, I just know what happens to those surveys when they get when they get put out there. I think there are some other questions that are swirling. I think legislators are interested in inclusion and some other things that they want some data on. And I think there are some other questions that we could ask with that in the form of a more systematic form that would guarantee that we would have actionable data. I mean, I'm okay. At the end of the day, this is not a hill I'm dying on, but I'm just concerned that we go through this, we do exactly what we're trying not to do, which is inundate, having data requests come from a lot of different places, and we end up contradicting ourselves and then end up with data that is very squishy. So it's
Thank
not a
you.
hill I'm going to die on. It's just something, it's just a gut
No, it's
reaction.
good thought. And these are the beginning stages. And that's why, like I said, I appreciate what USEEP is doing and the conversation that we're happening. I want to end this meeting in 6 minutes at 12:45.
I've got a motion that's,
And
well, it's substitute.
member Wood, go ahead.
Just speaking to this, I'm wondering if it would be better for the board to receive rather than to forward the recommendation on, but to recommend that the board receive the USEAP recommendations to the board. Just looking at, and in better wording that we so that like they make it, I want them to make it to the board. I want them to see them, but rather than forwarding the recommendations on, but that we receive the report.
That's all. And that would be and
So-
that's the end of your motion. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that was amending that wording up above, just as I just,
Oh,
I don't want there to be
Oh.
any, where we
I
already
see.
have it seems like there's already some concerns about just doing the survey.
So you're still,
just.
It's still your original amendment to my motion is you're
Yeah.
changing forward to receive.
yeah.
And so the intent, if we're understanding, Member Wood, is that the full board gets their eyes on what USEEP has recommended. And then we can still recommend
Yeah.
whatever going forward.
I'm
Yeah.
fine with that.
Okay.
I don't want this.
So let's,
If we vote down a survey, I just don't want this to die. I want the board to see the work that that they've done, that we acknowledge.
right. Okay, so your amendment to the motion is to add receive USEEP recommendation 2 and, if I'm reading the italicized.
Yes, thank you.
Without any other hands or lights, committee members, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. No. So we have 4 ayes, 1 no, that passes. Now, the motion on the floor is that the committee receive USEEP recommendation 2 and recommend that the board direct staff to develop and send to LEAs an optional supply and demand survey on special education teachers and paraeducators. Without further discussion, all in favor say aye.
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 Aye. All opposed? Those opposed? Abstaining?
No, I mean, I'll
No,
still 3-2. I know, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. I'm
Okay.
going to remain undecided.
That's,
I just want to do more research.
it passes with 3 yays.
I want actually.
That's perfect. Passes with 3. Okay.
I'm comfortable with that.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee.
Thank you, Dr. Voorhees.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle. Just so you're aware, we have 3 minutes. There is a final agenda item, 3.14, Board Policy 1004, Advisory Groups. This is an information item. We don't have time to cover this right now, but I invite committee members to reach out to Ben and Kelsey to get questions answered. And then, Member Hart, can I interrupt for just 1 second? I'm sorry. No, it's okay. We're before we close the meeting in 3 minutes, Board Policy 1004, there were some questions that we had last committee meeting. Today was a discussion item where we could answer some of those questions. We didn't get to it, so I'm inviting committee members to reach out to staff. What's the next step? And I'm asking Member Hart as a board leadership, if changes want to be made even after receiving the information. Would the committee member bring it back to leadership?
So because it's a discussion item and
Okay.
take that to leadership.
There was no there. Can I hear, sorry.
I am sorry. Because it is noticed as a discussion item, it'll be forwarded to the board. It'll be on the board agenda as a discussion item unless 3 members ask for consideration for it to be an action item for the next board meeting. So upon reviewing the material and then calling and asking questions and such, if 3 board members want to forward it as an action item, that would go in front of leadership for consideration prior to the next board meeting. And that's what would have happened anyway, even if we would have had an hour-and-a-half discussion.
Right. But I do think a discussion is necessary. There's some thoughts on that policy so please, Member Lear.
Just to clarify, you're saying that it's not going to come back to this committee for further discussion. It'll just be discussed by the board if 3 members ask for it to be on as an
So
action.
as a discussion item on the committee agenda, I am encouraging committee members to talk to staff as we don't get that conversation here. And then committee members, if they would like to take it to the next level, then they will talk to other board members and get that to leadership.
No,
It is 12:45. I'm
we
seeking a
can
motion
also, board members can request it going to committee as well. They don't have to, they're not limited to just putting it on the board agenda. They can put it on the committee agenda for discussion as well.
I
Okay.
would like to discuss it. Sorry.
And you had a motion to adjourn?
adjourn, I did.
Perfect.
Oh, yes, I had a motion to adjourn as well.
Thank you. Perfect. Meeting adjourned.